Alternative ending: reincarnation of the strongest sword god. Chapter 11: Reconstructing Mana Body. Even after Shi Feng had left the Colosseum, it took a long time for Wu Lingling to come back to her senses. What are your thoughts on Instructor Shi's words, Uncle Gan? Do you think he really intends to have us students participate in the battle for the Dark Moon Outpost? Wu Lingling asked as she looked at Gan Yuan, her heart filled with anxiety and excitement. The Dark Moon Outpost was a stronghold that every guild based in 100 Flow City sought to obtain. Meanwhile, because of the limited number of people that could participate in the actual competition, every participating guild would undoubtedly be sending their strongest members to represent them. Although many of God's Domain's guilds did not send their truly powerful experts to develop in the miniature ancient world, some of the larger guilds should not have any problems dispatching peak experts to fight for the Dark Moon Outpost. In the case of first-rate guilds, even the weakest member they sent would most likely be first-rate experts that were capable of reaching the trial tower's 7th floor. In comparison, most of the students apprenticed under Shi Feng hadn't even reached the trial tower's 5th floor. With their strength, they couldn't even serve as cannon fodder if they participated in the competition. Of course, Wu Lingling couldn't rule out the possibility that Shi Feng was trying to widen their horizons. After all, it was rare to see battles involving thousands of powerful experts in God's domain, let alone participate in one. If budding players like them could take part in such a battle, it would significantly help their future development. However, as the first Mana outpost one would encounter after leaving 100 Flow City, the Dark Moon Outpost held extraordinary significance to the various guilds. It was also why Zhou Yalin tried to recruit Shi Feng's help even if it meant paying a steep cost. Only, if Zhou Yalin were to find out that Shi Feng's so-called teammates were merely a bunch of freshmen from the God's Domain Academy, she would absolutely refuse Shi Feng's demand. If Mysterious Moon failed to occupy the Dark Moon Outpost, the entire guild would probably bear an eternal grudge against Shi Feng. After all, the 30 participation slots Shi Feng asked for could significantly impact the competition's outcome. Not to mention, Mysterious Moon had no lack of peak experts and first-rate experts to fill these slots. The guild wasn't so desperate as to seek freshman students as backup. He is probably joking with you, Gan Yuan said, shaking his head and smiling. There are only 5,000 participation slots in total, and there are more than 30 second-rate guilds and 7 first-rate guilds based in 100 Flow City. There are also numerous third-rate guilds and unrated guilds. A first-rate guild would be fortunate to even secure 300 slots. If he lets you students take up 10% of Mysterious Moon's slots, Mysterious Moon might as well call it quits already. In Gan Yuan's opinion, there was no way an expert of Shi Feng's caliber would not know of the Dark Moon Outpost's significance. Even if he wanted to train his students, there was no need to do so during such a crucial event. Having the students participate in the competition would be no different than making an enemy out of Mysterious Moon. Although Shi Feng possessed great combat standards, even he would suffer if he angered a first-rate guild. After all, even Tier 5 experts dared not go up against first-rate guilds up front. Otherwise, they would have to face the pursuit of several Tier 5 experts. However, shortly after Gan Yuan finished speaking, Wu Lingling received a message that thoroughly dumbfounded her and Gan Yuan. Is he insane? Gan Yuan felt his mind falling into disarray when he read the message Wu Lingling shared with him. The message's content was simple. Shi Feng had appointed Wu Lingling as his class representative, and he had tasked her with contacting her classmates and gathering them in 100 Flow City's Blue Rose Bar in 8 hours. At the end of the message, Shi Feng had also stated that all students under him would be participating in the battle for the Dark Moon Outpost 10 days later. What should I do, Uncle Gan? Wu Lingling couldn't help but be scared by this situation. Should I ask Big Sis to send some experts over? Wu Lingling was truly afraid now that she was certain of Shi Feng's intentions. After all, what Shi Feng was doing was no different than playing with their lives. If this situation wasn't handled properly, all of them would be dragged down into the abyss. In response to Wu Lingling's question, Gan Yuan shook his head and said, there's no point in doing that. Entering the miniature ancient world is equivalent to starting a new account. Not everyone is willing to take such a risk since there is no guarantee that they can return to and surpass their strongest state. Although the benefit of reconstructing one's mana body was indeed tempting, the mana body wasn't the only factor that affected a player's ability to ascend to higher tiers. There were still many other factors that had to be taken into account. Typically, only experts who had poor foundations and encountered very little fortuitous opportunities in God's domain would be willing to enter the miniature ancient world. Either that or the mana body they created was far from ideal. Take Gan Yuan, for example. He had only created a silver mana body with a 76% completion rate when he was at tier 3. While it wasn't terrible, it wasn't good, either. If he kept with that mana body, it was unlikely that he would ever reach tier 5 in his lifetime. Thus, he had decided to enter the miniature ancient world. Not to mention, he could also nurture a budding talent like Wu Lingling and earn a favor from Wu Xiaoxiao, one of the top prodigies of the guild's younger generation. Apart from him, few of the guild's other tier 4 experts were willing to enter the miniature ancient world. And for those who did enter the miniature ancient world, the guild had long since assigned them other important tasks. There was no way they'd be willing to make time to help a bunch of outsiders. Upon hearing Gan Yuan's words, Wu Lingling remembered that they were no longer on the main continent but in the miniature ancient world instead. Here, even a prioritized talent like her elder sister would have difficulty mobilizing groups of experts. But you don't have to worry too much. I know a few skilled experts who have entered the miniature ancient world. If I give them a call, I'm sure we won't have any problems coping with the competition, Gan Yuan said, smiling when he saw Wu Lingling's crestfallen expression. However, I'll need you to talk things out with Instructor Shi first. Under normal circumstances, Gan Yuan wouldn't have bothered himself with such a troublesome matter. However, after witnessing Shi Feng's skills, he felt that it wouldn't be a bad idea to befriend such a powerful expert. After all, it was rare for tier 4 experts like Gan Yuan to come across an expert of Shi Feng's caliber. And even if he managed to come across such an expert, the other party wouldn't bother interacting with him. After all, they were standing on two completely different levels. Meanwhile, for experts like Gan Yuan, who were stuck at tier 4, their only option to make further progress was to acquire more resources. However, the resources necessary were not things that measly tier 4 experts could obtain. Only experts of Shi Feng's caliber could do so. Thus, now that there was an opportunity to befriend such an expert, Gan Yuan would naturally take it. Wu Lingling also nodded to Gan Yuan's request. 100 Flow City, City Hall. After leaving the Colosseum, Shi Feng had visited the City Hall and made his way up to the second floor. When Shi Feng arrived on the second floor, a blonde elven woman wearing black office wear approached him. Then, the woman pointed at a record book on a nearby coffee table and smiled, saying, "Greetings, sir. You can find all of 100 Flow City's vacant lands and shops sold here. If you are interested in a particular land or shop, feel free to tell me. I will do my best to give you the best price." The record book was very thick. When Shi Feng flipped through the pages, he found that the number of lands and shops available in 100 Flow City far exceeded even that of royal capitals found on the main continent. Looking at all the available options, Shi Feng didn't know where to begin his search for his ideal shop. After looking through the record book for some time, Shi Feng gave up and asked, "Do you have any recommendations for shops in the central area?" There are two excellent shops in the central area. One is an advanced shop located near the main street. It has 7 floors, and it is selling for 45,000 gold. The other one is a hotel located near the teleportation hall. The hotel has 3 floors, and it is selling for 22,000 gold, the elven administrator said as she took out 2 projection crystals and activated them. These 2 locations have only gone up for sale starting this month. Whether it is their price or location, they are rare finds in 100 Flow City. Shi Feng couldn't help but be moved as he looked at the projected images. The lands and shops found in 100 Flow City's central area were exceptionally expensive. Even a basic shop sold for upwards of 30,000 gold, while vacant lands sold for upwards of 20,000 gold. Moreover, these prices only referred to small lands. Meanwhile, the two locations the administrator introduced both occupied medium lands. The fact that they're being sold for such a low price could be considered a hidden benefit to the first player to purchase shops and lands in 100 Flow City. Moreover, out of the two recommendations, one of them was even an advanced shop. If Shi Feng could purchase this shop, he could make a fortune just by letting other players consign their items at the shop. Not to mention, an advanced shop would also come with its own specialty goods, and he could use these goods to earn a stable income. As for the hotel, it wasn't a bad option, either. Now that there were no guild residences in 100 Flow City yet, the only way players could accumulate the double EXP buff and accelerate their grinding speed would be to stay in hotels. Thus, Shi Feng could also earn a significant income if he bought the hotel. Unfortunately, Shi Feng lacked the coins to purchase even the hotel. Previously, he had spent 2 million credits to purchase 20,000 gold from a player merchant. Afterward, he had spent 500 gold in the Colosseum. Thus, he only had 19,500 gold in his bag right now. Can I get a discount if I decide to make a purchase? Shi Feng asked as he looked at the administrator. The elven administrator pondered for a moment when she heard Shi Feng's question. Then, she said, "You are the first person to have acquired 100 Flow City's Colosseum Master's insignia in the past few decades. If you decide to make a purchase, I can give you a 20% discount on one purchase." 20%? Shi Feng was surprised. Originally, he thought it would be great if he could get even a 5% discount. He didn't think that the Colosseum Master's insignia would provide him with such an amazing benefit. "Okay, I'll take this hotel, then," Shi Feng said as he pointed at the 3-story hotel projected before him. Although the advanced shop was tempting, he currently lacked funds and resources. Thus, the hotel was his best option. Moreover, he still needed to guide a bunch of students. If he bought the hotel, he could save on their accommodation fees, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Very well. That will be 17,600 gold, the administrator said. You will also have to pay a monthly management fee of 1,000 gold for this hotel. If you fail to make payment for 3 consecutive months, we will be repossessing the hotel. Afterward, Shi Feng decisively paid 17,600 gold to the elven administrator and received the hotel's deed in return. Then, he left the city hall and visited the hotel to complete the property transfer. The hotel was located next to the teleportation hall, so it could be considered prime real estate in 100 Flow City. After all, every player that teleported into 100 Flow City using a return scroll would arrive in the teleportation hall. So, the street the teleportation hall was located on became a place where almost all players had to pass through. In reality, the hotel's value was far from being worth just 17,600 gold. Even if it was sold for an astronomical price of 50,000 gold, guilds would still fight to purchase it. A magic array currently sealed the 3-story hotel, and no employees were working in the establishment. Only Shi Feng, the holder of the hotel's deed, could enter the place. The density of the mana here is quite good. It's actually 30% higher than the outside world. Shi Feng felt very satisfied when he sensed the mana within the hotel. A difference of 30% in mana density might not seem like much, but the mana in the miniature ancient world was originally much higher than the main continent's mana already. Thus, an increase of 30% was substantial. Players could receive substantial benefits if they tried to perceive and manipulate mana in this environment. Afterward, Shi Feng started inspecting the hotel's interior. The hotel had 600 rooms spread across its 3 floors, of which 560 were basic rooms and 40 were advanced rooms. This was an impressive number for a basic hotel. Even if he charged only 20 silver per room, he could still make 120 gold per day. Currently, ordinary Tier 3 experts earned only 2 to 3 gold per day on average. After deducting the money spent on repairing equipment and purchasing supplies, a Tier 3 expert would be fortunate if they could have 1 gold remaining. Meanwhile, a daily income of 120 gold was unfathomable for the average Tier 3 expert. When Shi Feng entered an advanced room, he found that the density of the mana here was 20% higher than the mana found inside the basic rooms. This is a good place to reconstruct my mana body. Originally, Shi Feng had planned to visit an advanced hotel in 100 Flow City to reconstruct his mana body. The construction of a mana body heavily depended on the ambient mana's density. Players would have a much easier time constructing their mana bodies if they did it in a place with dense mana. Of course, after a certain point, the benefits high-density mana brought would start to diminish. Meanwhile, the density of the mana found in this hotel's advanced rooms was already considerably high. Even if Shi Feng visited a place with even denser mana, the benefits he could gain would be negligible. Immediately, Shi Feng sat cross-legged on the mana-gathering magic array prepared in the middle of the room. Then, he took out the demon god's blood that he had won from the Colosseum. The instant Shi Feng opened the vial housing the demon god's blood, a powerful divine might instantly flooded the room. Even Shi Feng found himself having difficulty breathing under the pressure of this divine might. System, do you wish to use the demon god's blood and begin reconstructing your mana body? Yes. Chapter 12 Going Beyond Epic. As soon as Shi Feng chose to reconstruct his mana body, the crimson blood in the vial transformed into streams of purplish-red mist that flowed into his body. 3 seconds later, golden divine runes appeared around Shi Feng one after another, emitting ripples of divine might. The divine might was incredibly powerful, and even Tier 4 experts would find themselves immobilized when subjected to it. The divine runes that appeared were akin to flames as they continuously burned and erased Shi Feng's original mana body. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. After 15 minutes had passed, Shi Feng could feel the divine might that enveloped his body growing weaker and weaker. Likewise, the presence of his mana body also grew fainter and fainter. By the time the divine might disappeared completely, his mana body's presence had disappeared completely. Simultaneously, a feeling of weakness spread across Shi Feng's body. Amazing! It removed my mana body completely. Shi Feng grew excited when he sensed that his bronze mana body had disappeared already. Although players could progress up to Tier 6 in God's domain, the biggest milestone was at Tier 3. This was because the mana body players constructed at Tier 3 would play a significant role in their advancement to higher tiers in the future. The mana body was also the main factor that separated God's domain's experts into 2 distinct classes. Even if a player managed to reach Tier 4, if their mana body did not reach the silver rank, they couldn't be regarded as an upper-class expert no matter what. They could never become a true mainstay in first-rate guilds and above. However, this wasn't an unreasonable distinction. After all, the mana body represented a player's future potential. No guild would be willing to support and nurture a person with no potential. This was also why second- and third-rate guilds could never contend against first-rate guilds. Unlike second- and third-rate guilds, first-rate guilds would only accept those with a silver mana body or above as their mainstays and executives. Next is the last step. Shi Feng focused his attention on the system notification that had appeared before him. System, you have begun the reconstruction of your mana body. You have 6 hours to reconstruct your mana body. System, congratulations! You are the first player to have acquired a perfect epic demon god's blood. You can choose between obtaining 1 legendary mana body diagram, 1 peak epic mana body diagram, or 1 advanced epic mana body diagram. Legendary? Shi Feng was dumbfounded. When he had become a Tier 6 sword god in the past, the mana body he had created for himself at Tier 3 was only an advanced epic mana body. Although he couldn't say for certain that he had been the only person to have acquired an advanced epic mana body out of the many god-ranked experts back then, even if there were others like him, there shouldn't be more than a handful. After all, in the eyes of most guilds, gold mana bodies were already the best mana body one could acquire. Information on epic mana bodies was so rare that most people didn't even know they existed. If not for the Miniature Ancient Worlds expansion pack information publicizing the existence of epic mana bodies, the first-rate guilds in this life probably wouldn't even know that there existed mana bodies surpassing gold mana bodies. As for legendary mana bodies, that was something even Shi Feng had never heard of after becoming a Tier 6 sword god. It should be known that players with a gold mana body could already roam the continent without fear of the hostile energies that plagued high-level maps. If a player acquired an epic mana body, they could further boost their stamina and concentration recovery rates. Even their perception toward mana would receive a considerable improvement. The benefits an epic mana body provided could probably allow players to move about freely even in the Miniature Ancient Worlds hostile environment. Acquiring an epic mana body was also part of Shi Feng's plan to restart his campaign in God's domain. However, Shi Feng never thought that there existed another rank above epic. Before Shi Feng could recover from his surprise, another system notification appeared. System, you have 15 minutes to choose a mana body diagram. If you fail to decide within 15 minutes, you will receive the advanced epic mana body by default. Interesting. Shi Feng smiled when he saw the system notification. Then, he began carefully inspecting the 3 mana body diagrams the system provided. If given a choice, Shi Feng would naturally choose the best mana body he could get his hands on. However, that was based on the precondition of completing the construction process within the allotted time. If he went with the legendary mana body out of greed and failed to construct it, he would simply be throwing away the opportunity to secure himself an advanced epic mana body or peak epic mana body. 10 minutes later, Shi Feng closed his eyes and took a deep breath. As expected of a mana body that is above epic rank, even Apex experts are unlikely to be able to complete this legendary mana body in just 6 hours. Shi Feng already experienced constructing an advanced epic mana body in his previous life, so he was confident he could construct a perfect one this time. He was even confident he could construct a peak epic mana body with a 95% completion rate or above. The construction of a mana body depended on the player's control over mana. The more adept one was at manipulating mana, the easier it would be for one to construct one's mana body. Meanwhile, as someone who had become a Tier 6 god in the past, Shi Feng's mastery over mana manipulation had long since reached a realm that ordinary experts could not fathom. However, the legendary mana body's complexity was far above that of even epic mana bodies. The construction of an advanced epic mana body only needed players to control 5 sources of mana to create 5 separate magic arrays, while a peak epic mana body needed players to control 8 sources of mana. However, in the case of the legendary mana body, players needed to control as many as 16 sources of mana simultaneously. Even Shi Feng had barely met this requirement. Moreover, this still wasn't the most crucial point. What made constructing the legendary mana body truly challenging was that players needed to construct 7 master magic arrays and connect them to form one grandmaster magic array. Although Shi Feng had been a grandmaster magician during his previous life, with his current tier and concentration standard, he would be hard-pressed to construct so many high-ranking magic arrays. Not to mention, every one of these magic arrays needed to have a considerably high completion rate. Otherwise, the legendary mana body he created might even lose out to an epic mana body with a high completion rate. However, despite knowing the difficulty, Shi Feng still chose to construct the legendary mana body without hesitation. He had lost his memories for some inexplicable reason after entering the main world in the past. This showed that the main world was a much more dangerous place than he expected and that the strength he had back then wasn't enough to ensure his safety in the main world. Thus, what he needed to do now was simply become much stronger than he had been in his previous life. Only by doing so would he have a chance at recovering his lost memories. Meanwhile, the legendary mana body was undoubtedly the first step into helping him grow stronger. Thus, regardless of the difficulty, he needed to try constructing the legendary mana body. Subsequently, Shi Feng began manipulating the surrounding mana and constructing the legendary mana body based on the provided diagram. Because Shi Feng sorely lacked in concentration recovery methods right now, manipulating 16 sources of mana simultaneously placed a heavy burden on his mind. At this time, he was relying entirely on his knowledge and experience as a Grandmaster Magician to create the 9 supporting magic arrays and 1 Grandmaster magic array. As time passed and he encountered failure after failure, he grew increasingly familiar with the Grandmaster magic array's construction process. After working continuously for 4 hours, Shi Feng finally completed his first attempt at constructing the legendary mana body. System: Mana body constructed. Completion rate 71%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? No. Shi Feng rejected without hesitation. A mana body needed to reach an 80% completion rate for it to function normally. Below 80%, a mana body would have its effects weakened. Thus, Shi Feng's legendary mana body needed an 80% completion rate at the very minimum. Otherwise, he would have been better off going for an epic mana body with completion rate above 90%. After all, a mana body with a 90% completion rate would be able to perform at 100% capacity, and every additional percentage gained in completion rate would improve the mana body's performance significantly. In the past, Shi Feng had been lucky and achieved a 91% completion rate on his advanced epic mana body. It had saved him a lot of trouble when he was advancing to higher tiers. Subsequently, Shi Feng started his second attempt. Because of his previous experience, Shi Feng took less than half an hour this time to complete his mana body. Moreover, its completion rate had surpassed the passing mark and reached 83%. However, Shi Feng wasn't satisfied with this outcome, so he proceeded with his third and fourth attempts. Shi Feng made a slight mistake on his third attempt, and the completion rate he got was 76%. On his fourth attempt, he managed an 86% completion rate. For the average expert, they would be delighted with such a result even if their mana body was only at the silver rank, let alone the unheard of legendary rank. However, Shi Feng still wasn't satisfied with this result. I only have time for one more try? Shi Feng hesitated for a moment when he saw the remaining time. However, after thinking it over, he clenched his teeth and began his fifth attempt. Shi Feng would be lying if he said he wasn't satisfied with an 86% completion rate. However, if he wished to surpass his previous life, this result wasn't enough. After all, he no longer had the support of a guild in this life. If he lacked a sufficiently powerful mana body, he would have a tough time rising to the top of God's domain. After 4 attempts, Shi Feng had already become very familiar with the legendary mana body's construction process. On his 4th attempt, he needed 10 minutes to construct the 7 master magic arrays and link them into one big grandmaster magic array. Now, he needed only 7 minutes to do so. Moreover, the construction process went much more smoothly than before. However, time was also ticking away rapidly as Shi Feng constructed his mana body. 17 minutes remaining, 12 minutes remaining, 6 minutes, 3 minutes. When less than 2 minutes remained, Shi Feng inhaled and exhaled deeply. Good. It's done. Shi Feng exclaimed out of excitement. Simultaneously, a system notification also appeared before him. System: Mana body constructed. Completion rate 94%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? Chapter 13 Inherent Mana Domain. 94%? Shi Feng grew ecstatic when he read the system notification. A mana body with a 90% completion rate could already perform at 100% capacity, and every percentage increase after 90% would further enhance the mana body to a certain extent. Meanwhile, an additional 4% would provide a massive improvement. To provide some context, take Alice, the Witch of the West, for example. She was known by all in God's domain for her gold mana body that had a 98% completion rate. This gold mana body granted her extraordinary perception and control toward mana, which, in turn, allowed her to stand above all magical class players. Meanwhile, the only mana body that could match Alice's near-perfect gold mana body was probably Shifeng's advanced epic mana body, which had a 91% completion rate. Now, though, not only did Shifeng have a legendary mana body, but its completion rate had even reached 94%. If comparing solely in terms of mana perception and control, he was leagues above his previous life. System, mana body constructed. Completion rate 94%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? Upon receiving another reminder from the system, Shifeng quickly snapped out of his daze and chose to keep the mana body he created. Immediately afterward, golden divine runes appeared around Shifeng's body. The dense mana surrounding Shifeng also flooded into his body, continuously improving his body's overall strength and perception. In just several seconds, Shifeng could sense that he had already surpassed himself when he first constructed his advanced epic mana body. The strengthening process continued for nearly 20 seconds before the divine runes faded out of existence. At this time, not one bit of mana remained inside the room. Mana was the foundation of all life in God's domain, so a place without mana was not a place that living creatures could survive in. Even Tier 3 players with a gold mana body could only survive in a space void of mana for a short period. Yet, at this time, Shifeng did not feel even the slightest discomfort while sitting in this manaless room. So, this is a legendary mana body? An indescribable sense of shock filled Shifeng as he perceived the space around him. When he had first completed his advanced epic mana body in his previous life, he had only acquired a rudimentary form of a mana domain whose only function was to prevent the mana in his body from leaking away. However, the completion of the legendary mana body had directly provided him with a fully functioning mana domain. Although this mana domain only covered a small radius of 10 yards, it was still a bona fide mana domain. Within the space the mana domain covered, he was the ruler. He could freely manipulate mana within this space and prevent it from being influenced by the mana outside. Typically, players would only begin creating a rudimentary form of a mana domain after they had reached Tier 4. Meanwhile, only a small minority of experts would be capable of creating a full-fledged mana domain at Tier 4. Yet, Shifeng had received a full-fledged mana domain immediately after he had constructed his mana body. Apart from the full-fledged mana domain, what also surprised Shifeng was the improvement he received toward his mana perception, recovery speeds for stamina and concentration, and the toughness of his body. Afterlife of the party. It came from below. Free guy meets girl, 60-second spot. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, icon, spot. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, tickets on sale, spot. A Journal for Jordan, teaser trailer 1. Everyone's talking about Jamie, trailer 2. He's all that, French trailer 1. Free guy, Las Reacciones Máximas de Deadpool, Latin America market subtitled. Collection. Even though a mana body didn't provide players with any increase in basic attributes, it still influenced a player's performance heavily as it provided non-statistical improvements such as mana perception, recovery speed, and physical toughness. Firstly, mana perception. Mana perception played an important role in players' ability to manipulate mana. Meanwhile, the better a player was at manipulating mana, the higher their skills and spells completion rates would be. Secondly, recovery speed. The greater a player's recovery speed was, the quicker they could recover the stamina and concentration they expended in battle. This, in turn, would increase the duration in which they could stay in the battle. Lastly, physical toughness. Physical toughness affected a player's ability to withstand attacks. Although physical toughness wouldn't reduce the amount of damage players took, it reduced players' chances of suffering physical injuries. If a player had sufficiently high physical toughness, an attack that should have originally caused a heavy injury might only end up causing a light injury. This was a significant difference as a light injury wouldn't hamper a player's performance, whereas a heavy injury would. If a player sorely lacked physical toughness, they might even lose their limbs to a powerful attack, severely affecting their combat performance. Currently, Shi Feng could sense that his mana perception was already on par with what he had when he initially reached Tier 4 during his previous life. He could already clearly perceive the basic operating principles of the various elements of mana surrounding him. As for his recovery speed, it was double that of the advanced epic mana body. Even though he was only a Tier 3 Sword King right now, he could execute 6 extreme slashes, an advanced combat technique, without burden. As for his physical toughness, it was already on par with the physical toughness of the average Tier 4 mythic monster. Now, attacks at the Tier 3 standard couldn't even put a scratch on him, and only Tier 4 attacks could threaten him. This inherent mana domain saves me a lot of trouble. Shi Feng couldn't help but smile as he manipulated his mana domain. His mana domain would only cover a 10-yard radius around him when he wasn't actively controlling it. However, once he actively controlled it, the mana domain could cover up to a 50-yard radius. While a 50-yard radius was below average for a full-fledged mana domain, it was more than enough for a Tier 3 player. This was because the maximum attack range of the average Tier 3 expert was only 50 yards. Meanwhile, his mana domain would weaken all enemies within its range by a certain extent. Originally, Shi Feng had been having a headache trying to think of a way to help his students. His students were far too weak right now, and if he wanted them to be of any help to him, he needed to improve their combat standards. Only, improving their combat standards was easier said than done. Even though he had taught his students the refinement exercise, they couldn't reach the refinement realm solely by relying on the exercise. They needed to pair the exercise with lots of combat experience. If he still had the resources available to Zero Wing, he could have simply let his students participate in simulated battles against refinement realm experts and gain combat experience that way. This was also how the various superpowers trained their young talents. However, he was merely the ex-guild leader of a second-rate guild right now. He didn't have any training resources in his possession right now. Trying to mimic the training methods of superpowers was nothing but a dream. Thus, the only option available to him was to have his students partake in live combat. Before constructing his legendary mana body and acquiring a mana domain, Shi Feng would have had difficulty creating a safe environment for his students to carry out live combat. However, now that he had a mana domain, that would no longer be a problem. So long as his students fought within his mana domain, he could control the flow of battle as he wished, thereby minimizing the risk of casualties. Meanwhile, when Shi Feng was inspecting his new mana domain, he suddenly received a call from Wu Lingling. "Everyone has gathered in the Blue Rose Bar already, Instructor Shi," Wu Lingling said as she looked at Shi Feng through the video chat. Then, she worriedly asked, "Should I make some additional arrangements?" Previously, Shi Feng had already made it clear in his message that they would be challenging the Withered Ruins, the nearest level 100 regional dungeon to 100 Flow City. Unlike team dungeons, regional dungeons didn't have an entry limit. Players could enter the map by themselves or in massive teams. Meanwhile, not only did the monsters inside a regional dungeon provide ample EXP, but they also had much better loot than monsters found in the outside world. Thus, the Withered Ruins was the perfect place for 100 Flow Cities experts to grind it. However, grinding at the Withered Ruins wasn't an easy task. Like team dungeons, regional dungeons could similarly be categorized by difficulty, with the first 3 difficulties being normal, hard, and hell. Among them, hard mode regional dungeons were already enough to deter the average Tier 3 team. Only teams made up of Tier 3 experts could cope in these dungeons. Meanwhile, the Withered Ruins was a hell mode regional dungeon. Even Tier 3 expert teams could face annihilation if they weren't careful inside. Typically, only the frontline teams of large guilds could operate with relative safety inside a hell mode regional dungeon. As for freshman students like themselves, they were almost guaranteed to die should they enter the Withered Ruins. If they wanted to grind inside the Withered Ruins, they would need to recruit the help of some frontline experts. After all, there was no way Shi Feng could take care of everyone on the team. Shi Feng chuckled at Wu Lingling's concern. Then, he said, since you've already gathered, fill your stomachs with some food and drinks. We'll meet up at the Withered Ruins entrance in 2 hours. Fighting in a regional dungeon is much more exhausting than fighting in the outside world, so you should also prepare some stamina and concentration recovery potions. After saying so, Shi Feng disconnected the call, his words rendering Wu Lingling speechless. A female guardian knight wielding dark gold ranked buckler and clad in level 100 fine gold equipment happened to overhear Shi Feng and Wu Lingling. In a worried voice, the female guardian knight asked, "Could Instructor she be joking with us, class rep? The Withered Ruins is a hell mode regional dungeon. If we head there as we are now." Previously, when the other students heard from Wu Lingling that they would be going to the Withered Ruins, they had reacted in joy and excitement. Hell mode regional dungeons were places where even ordinary expert teams dared not enter, and only the expert teams of powerful guilds and adventurer teams would set foot into it. Under normal circumstances, students like themselves wouldn't even dare harbor any thoughts of entering a hell mode regional dungeon. Even the advanced instructors of the God's Domain Academy wouldn't bring their students into one. After all, doing so would require them to hire a bunch of frontline experts as babysitters, and they definitely wouldn't be willing to foot such a cost for mere students. Thus, they were ecstatic when they first heard that Shi Feng would be taking them into the Withered Ruins. Now, though, is Instructor Shi trying to take a gamble? It's the freshman tournament tomorrow, and every instructor has to send 3 students out to fight as a team. I heard that the top 3 instructors would get to visit one of the secret pavilion's training branches. This is a rare opportunity even in our academy, a male assassin with a lean body suddenly said. Upon hearing this male assassin's words, realization immediately dawned upon the other students present. The secret pavilion was a transcendental existence in God's domain, and innumerable experts had originated from it. Even among super guilds, few were capable of rivaling the secret pavilion when it came to training talents. However, the secret pavilion would only ever train its own talents. Never did it allow the talents and experts of the various academies to join its training program. Now, though, the secret pavilion was allowing the God's Domain Academy's instructors to visit one of its training branches. This was undoubtedly a rare opportunity for the academy's instructors. Meanwhile, it was already common knowledge that Shi Feng had been Shadow's ex-guild leader and that he had failed to break out of Tier 3 even after many years of struggles. If he could participate in the secret pavilion's training session, he might finally achieve a breakthrough and reach Tier 4. Meanwhile, out of the 30 students apprenticed under Shi Feng, only Wu Lingling was capable of ranking among the top of this year's freshmen. However, the freshman tournament was a team match. There was no way Wu Lingling could win the tournament by herself. She needed teammates that could be of help to her. Thus, Shi Feng was taking them to the Withered Ruins and betting on the possibility that the other students might improve there. All right, stop making blind guesses. Let's get ready and set out. When Wu Lingling saw her classmates starting to voice opinions about Shi Feng's decision, she quickly stopped them in their tracks. Though, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry on the inside. If they were already complaining about grinding in the Withered Ruins, what would happen if she told them about the matter regarding the Mana outpost? Chapter 14 Entering Hell Mode for the first time. The Withered Ruins was a magnificent city surrounded by a dead forest. Currently, over 30 teams had gathered in front of the magic barrier that surrounded the dead forest. Every one of these teams had at least 100 members, with some having up to 200 members. Moreover, even the weakest player was equipped in level 100 dark gold set equipment, while the strongest was fully equipped in epic equipment. When Wu Lingling and the others first arrived before the Withered Ruins, they immediately felt an oppressive feeling enveloping their bodies. Right now, even a fool could tell that their group of students did not belong to this place. They stood out like a sore thumb when they stood among these expert players. Meanwhile, the arrival of Wu Lingling's group also attracted the attention of the many expert teams present. This was especially true for one particular 200-man team. After taking a glance at Wu Lingling's group, a woman clad in an exquisite robe and wielding a crystalline epic staff sneered and said, "What's a bunch of children like them doing here? What is their leader even thinking? Do they think that a Hell Mode regional dungeon is some playground for children?" The words of the woman attracted the approval of many of her team members. Like the woman, these people also looked at Wu Lingling with eyes full of contempt. While it was true that any player who met the level requirement could enter a Hell Mode team dungeon, it didn't mean anyone who met the level requirement should enter a Hell Mode team dungeon. After all, it wasn't without reason that Hell Mode team dungeons were known as leveling spots for expert players. There was no possibility that Wu Lingling and her teammates were experts disguised to look like university students, either. Although players could alter their character appearances in God's domain, they couldn't hide their age. Meanwhile, anyone could tell at a glance that Wu Lingling and her teammates were merely a bunch of students. Moreover, judging by how they moved, they were definitely a bunch of newbies who had entered God's domain only recently. With the combat standards they possessed, let alone putting up a fight, they couldn't flee for their lives should they enter the withered ruins. While the members of this 200-man team were having a hushed discussion about Wu Lingling's group, a middle-aged man clad in silver armor and wielding 2 tower shields also glanced at Wu Lingling's group. Then, he looked at his team members and said, "It's time. Get ready to enter." As soon as this middle-aged man spoke, everyone on the 200-man team promptly shut their mouths and readied themselves to enter the withered ruins. Even the woman wielding the crystalline epic staff dared not continue speaking. Instead, she took out a magic scroll from her bag and started casting a spell that increased everyone's basic attributes. Although their team had entered many Hell Mode regional dungeons before, those were dungeons found on the main continent. The miniature ancient world had a much harsher environment than the main continent, and the monsters here were much stronger. Since this was their first time entering a Hell Mode regional dungeon in the miniature ancient world, they had no idea exactly how powerful the monsters inside were. Thus, they dared not act recklessly. At the same time as this 200-man team started getting ready, the other teams present also began making their respective preparations. The behavior of these teams made it look like this 200-man team was their leader. The reason for everyone's reaction was simple. It was because this 200-man team had an extraordinary origin. Although this 200-man team consisted of only independent players, these players were all members of Soulfire, a top adventurer team in God's domain. Soulfire was an adventurer team that only appeared 5 years after the launch of God's domain. The adventurer team had started as a small group of several dozen players. Now, though, it had already become one of the top 50 adventurer teams on the eastern continent, its member count exceeding 200,000. Although Soulfire's member count was inferior to even third-rate guilds, every member qualified to join Soulfire was an expert capable of reaching the Trial Tower's 6th floor at the very least. Thus, Soulfire's overall strength rivaled even that of first-rate guilds. Moreover, the person leading Soulfire's 200-man team this time was none other than Southern Tiger, one of Soulfire's 16 captains and a half-step Tier 5 expert during his peak. Although Tier 5 players were labeled as apex existences in God's domain, the existence of Tier 5 players was incredibly rare. Tier 5 players were so rare that any one of them could instantly become the backbone of a first-rate guild should they choose to join one. In a situation where only a small portion of God's domain's players had chosen to enter the miniature ancient world, the existence of a half-step Tier 5 player was as rare as a phoenix's feather, let alone actual Tier 5 players. After all, not all players who had reached Tier 4 or higher possessed the courage to restart their progress from level 100 Tier 3. Meanwhile, even if everyone now had their tiers reduced to Tier 3, an expert who had once reached the half-step Tier 5 standard was still an existence worthy of everyone's respect. "Move out!" Southern Tiger bellowed as he looked toward the withered ruins. Immediately, Soulfire's 200-man team began marching toward the magic barrier that enveloped the regional dungeon. As for the other teams, they waited for around a minute after Soulfire's team disappeared before entering the dungeon themselves. Evidently, they planned on letting Soul Fire test the waters and open the way for them. When all but Shi Feng's students remained outside the withered ruins, Qin Wuchen couldn't help but turn toward Wu Lingling and asked, "What should we do now, class rep?" According to the information they found, it wasn't safe for players to enter the withered ruins whenever they wanted. This was due to the effects of the magic barrier enveloping the dungeon. On the surface, there was only one entrance into the withered ruins. However, in reality, the instant players walked through the magic barrier, they would be teleported to a random location inside the dungeon depending on their time of entry. Meanwhile, the current time just so happened to be when players were guaranteed to get teleported to the withered ruins outer region. Once players missed this safe period, they would have to either wait 6 hours for the next safe period or risk getting teleported to the withered ruins inner region. Even for current expert teams, a level 100 Hell Mode regional dungeon's outer region was a huge challenge, so getting teleported to the inner region would be an absolute nightmare. This was also why the many expert teams from before did not enter the withered ruins as soon as they arrived. Wu Lingling grew anxious when she heard Qin Wuchen's question. She had no idea what they should do right now. If they rashly entered the dungeon without Shi Feng accompanying them, they would all but guarantee their deaths. Yet, if they didn't enter the dungeon now, they would have to wait for 6 more hours to do so. The miniature ancient world had been opened to players only recently, so now was the best time for players to grind for levels. It was also a crucial period for players to secure the many opportunities available in the miniature ancient world for themselves. Their group had already wasted a lot of time gathering up previously. If they wasted 6 more hours on top of that, they would certainly miss out on many opportunities. During the time Wu Lingling was stomping her feet out of anxiety, a figure slowly approached the group of students. Meanwhile, this figure belonged to none other than Shi Feng. "What took you so long, Instructor Shi? The safe period is almost over. If we don't get ready to enter now, we'll have to wait here for another 6 hours." Wu Lingling immediately started complaining when she saw Shi Feng approaching. Compared to the expert teams from before, students like themselves needed to make many more preparations before entering a Hell Mode regional dungeon. Not only would they need to cast all sorts of buffs on themselves, but they would also have to use various enhancement potions. Most importantly, they needed to sort out everyone's responsibilities and positionings in battle. Otherwise, they would only be getting themselves killed if they entered the withered ruins. Similar to Wu Lingling, everyone else on the team also couldn't help but grow nervous. Although everyone had previously been afraid and opposed Shi Feng's decision to grind in the withered ruins, after arriving before the regional dungeon and seeing all those expert teams, they couldn't help but desire to compete with and grind at the same location as those expert teams. Thus, seeing Shi Feng's late and unhurried arrival stimulated their nerves. Meanwhile, Shi Feng chuckled when he saw the anxiety on his students' faces. Then, he said, "A Hell Mode regional dungeon isn't as tough as you imagine. You don't need any troublesome preparations, either. You bought the stamina recovery potions I asked you to, right? Have everyone take a bottle now, and let's enter the dungeon. Just 1 stamina recovery potion is enough." Wu Lingling couldn't help but doubt her ears when she heard Shi Feng's words. The stamina recovery potion was an item sold in almost every potion shop in God's domain. Although the potion had an exorbitant price tag of 1 gold per bottle, it was a must-have item when grinding out in the fields. This was especially true in the miniature ancient world. However, apart from improving the user's stamina recovery rate, the potion provided no other benefits. Yet, Shi Feng was now telling them that they only needed a stamina recovery potion to enter a Hell Mode regional dungeon? "Alright, hurry up. We're running out of time," Shi Feng said after taking a look at the time. "What about the team's division of labor and positioning, Instructor Shi?" Qin Wuchen asked in an exasperated tone. A team's positioning and division of labor were the foundation of team battles. If everyone on the team didn't have a clear task, chaos would ensue once the battle began. In such a situation, the team would be fortunate if it could even exhibit 30% of its combat power. Meanwhile, Shi Feng had not told them anything about their respective responsibilities when he gathered them before. Most of them had also only gotten acquainted with each other today, so they had no experience working together before. If they rashly entered the withered ruins under such circumstances, the consequences would be unimaginable. In response, Shi Feng smiled and leisurely said, "We can do that after we are inside. You guys really don't need to stress yourselves out so much. It's just a hell mode regional dungeon." Shi Feng's words rendered everyone speechless. Everyone also couldn't help but cast looks of contempt at their calm instructor. Even Wu Lingling was at the brink of tears when she heard Shi Feng's words. This was a hell mode regional dungeon they were talking about. Even the various large guilds' expert teams wouldn't dare act recklessly inside such a dungeon. Yet, now, Shi Feng spoke as if they were about to go and grind some common monsters at the beginner area. However, Shi Feng paid no attention to the looks of contempt he received. After having his students stand in a group, he promptly walked into the withered ruins. Seeing this, Wu Lingling and the others had no choice but to follow Shi Feng. Inwardly, they prayed that they wouldn't meet any monsters after entering the dungeon. The moment everyone stepped through the barrier, a bright light blinded them momentarily. Then, when their vision recovered, they found themselves standing on a hill a short distance away from the dilapidated city walls. Standing on top of the hill gave everyone a good view of their surroundings. They could see everything within a radius of several thousand yards. However, it was precisely because of this good field of view that Wu Lingling and the others couldn't help but gasp in shock. What? Wu Lingling and the others felt a chill crawling down their spines when they saw the half-orcs that covered the forest at the bottom of the hill. Demonized half-orc fighter, demonized creature, High Lord. Level 100. HP 50 million. Demonized half-orc warrior, demonized creature, Great Lord. Level 100. HP 140 million. These demonized half-orcs were 5 to 6 meters tall, and ominous pitch-black runes covered their robust bodies. Moreover, every one of these half-orcs patrolled the dead forest in groups, with the smaller groups having over 200 half-orcs and the larger groups having over 500 half-orcs. To make matters worse, demonized half-orc warriors made up at least 20% of every one of these groups' numbers. However, what made these demonized half-orcs truly terrifying was the number of HP bars they had. Even weaker half-orc fighters had 5 HP bars. In God's domain, the number of HP bars a monster had also represented the combat standards they possessed. Meanwhile, a monster with 5 HP bars would possess combat standards rivaling ordinary expert players. If ordinary experts came across such a monster, they would have to take the long way around, as picking a fight with such a monster would only lead to their deaths. Yet, even the weakest demonized half-orc here had 5 HP bars, while the stronger ones had 7 HP bars. Let alone their team of 30 students, even the 200-man expert team they came across would suffer if they fought against these demonized half-orcs. Meanwhile, during the time Wu Lingling and the others were stunned by the sight before them, Shi Feng suddenly said, "All right, let's start grinding." Before Wu Lingling and the others could react, Shi Feng picked up a small rock by his feet and threw it at a demonized half-orc warrior in the nearby forest, the rock transforming into a streak of light and accurately hitting the half-orc warrior's head. Immediately, the half-orc warrior that was struck turned to Shi Feng's direction and let loose an angry roar, the roar inciting the other half-orcs nearby into a frenzy. Then, every one of these frenzied half-orcs turned their heads toward Shi Feng's group. Chapter 15, Unfolded Monodomain. When the demonized half-orcs turned to look at Shi Feng, time on top of the hill seemingly froze as Wu Lingling and the others stopped moving, expressions of shock and horror coloring their faces. This was Shi Feng's so-called grinding? Even the weakest demonized half-orc was a level 100 High Lord. In terms of basic attributes, they were superior to even level 100 Tier 3 experts fully equipped in dark gold equipment. Adding on their combat standards that rivaled ordinary experts, even veteran Tier 3 expert players would have difficulty fighting these monsters. Not to mention, There were also plenty of Great Lord-ranked half-orc warriors among the group of half-orcs, and these monsters possessed even stronger basic attributes and combat standards. Even a large guild's expert team would have to set up traps and magic arrays beforehand when going up against such a frightening group of monsters. Yet, now, Shi Feng wanted them to fight these monsters with no preparations whatsoever. This situation was simply absurd. Before Wu Lingling and the others could recover from their shock, Shi Feng nonchalantly told them, "Each of you pick a target, lure it aside, and think of a way to beat it. Remember to stay within 100 yards of me at all times." Upon hearing Shi Feng's words, Wu Lingling couldn't help herself from asking, "What about the other monsters, Instructor Shi?" Immediately, the other students looked toward Shi Feng as well, curious to know the answer. Everyone had selectively chosen to ignore the part where Shi Feng required them to each lure a monster away. For them, accomplishing such an action wasn't at all difficult. The truly troublesome part was the remaining several hundred demonized half-orcs, particularly the Great Lord-ranked half-orc warriors. Normally, it would take several Tier 3 experts working together to defeat even one of these monsters. "Leave the rest to me," Shi Feng calmly replied. However, despite Shi Feng's calm and gentle tone, his words stunned everyone present. Even Wu Lingling, who believed in Shi Feng's strength, couldn't help but be surprised. Under normal circumstances, even a Tier 4 player wouldn't dare to fight against a large number of Great Lords unless they possessed a significant advantage in basic attributes. After all, there was strength in numbers. Not to mention, monsters in God's domain typically knew how to work together in battle. With their high HP, they could exhaust and kill a Tier 4 player without any problems. Currently, let alone having an advantage in basic attributes, Shi Feng didn't even have an advantage in tiers or levels. Yet, he spoke as if the approaching monsters were a bunch of insignificant creatures. During the time everyone was in a daze, the 300-plus demonized half-orcs had already arrived within 60 yards of the team. This was already a dangerous distance for both ranged and melee Tier 3 players. "All right, get ready," Shi Feng said, bringing everyone back to reality. Immediately, the students instinctively moved into battle positions and began choosing their respective half-orc fighters. Sacred Punishment, Starlight Arrow, Shadow Chaser, Thunder Howl. Wu Lingling and the other 29 students used their skills on their respective targets one after another, aggroing the monsters. Then, following Shi Feng's instructions, they spread out, lured the monsters away from the main group, and started fighting against these 30 half-orc fighters. As to whether they could defeat these half-orc fighters, none of them cared about that now. After all, no matter how their individual battles turned out, they were destined to lose this battle. Subsequently, the rest of the demonized half-orcs started moving closer and closer to Shi Feng. 50 yards. 40 yards. 30 yards. As the main group of half-orcs moved closer and closer to Shi Feng, Wu Lingling and the others also grew more and more nervous. Even the ground trembled at the charge of the 5-meter-tall half-orc fighters. The mana in the air had even turned violent, causing Wu Lingling and the others to experience a suffocating sensation. However, what made this group of demonized half-orcs truly terrifying wasn't their individual prowess. When the half-orcs were within 30 yards of Shi Feng, they suddenly split into two groups and encircled Shi Feng. Over 30 half-orc warriors also took the lead in attacking Shi Feng from all directions, leaving no gaps for Shi Feng to escape through. Wu Lingling's complexion paled at this scene. She did not expect the half-orcs to behave in such a manner. Normally, monsters that had reached level 100 in God's domain would gain a certain degree of intelligence and no longer mindlessly attack players. Instead, they would first probe their opponent's strength and target their opponent's weak points. When faced with such a reckless assault, even a Tier 4 player would have to rely on their superior basic attributes and physique to evade the monster's attacks. If they tried clashing head-on, they would certainly suffer injuries and maybe even get killed. After all, even a Tier 4 player would still take a lot of damage if they received an attack from a Tier 3 Great Lord, let alone a Tier 3 player. While Shi Feng indeed possessed combat standards and techniques that left even Gan Yuan in admiration, he was only a Tier 3 Sword King right now. Moreover, the gear he currently had on him was the default equipment players received when creating a new character in the miniature ancient world. He couldn't afford to make even the slightest mistake when going up against the 30-plus great lords with such parameters. Otherwise, death would instantly claim him. Contrasting Wu Lingling's reaction, Shi Feng remained calm even in the face of the half-orc warriors' frenzied assault. It looked as if he hadn't noticed the approaching half-orc warriors. Instead of hastily taking evasive maneuvers, he simply took a small step forward. Shi Feng's action looked incredibly natural and gentle. However, the instant Shi Feng's right foot touched the ground, Wu Lingling and the other students were immediately stunned. Suddenly, the space around Shi Feng had seemingly frozen as all of the half-orc warriors charging at him had stopped moving simultaneously. Although these half-orc warriors quickly started moving again, their movements had become much more sluggish and awkward than before. It looked as if these monsters were trying to maneuver inside a muddy swamp. However, what surprised Wu Lingling and the others the most was the mana surrounding Shi Feng. Previously, the demonized half-orc's presence had caused the ambient mana to grow violent. Now, though, none of the demonized half-orcs present were able to influence the mana surrounding them. Moreover, the density of the ambient mana had increased to a point where it had condensed into mist. A mana domain. Qin Wuchen couldn't help but rub his eyes in disbelief when he saw this scene from nearby. Most players in God's domain had trouble improving even the quality of the mana within their own bodies, let alone altering the mana around them. Of course, that wasn't to say that players couldn't accomplish such a feat. One method players could use to accomplish this feat was to set up a magic array to alter an area's mana composition and improve it. However, such magic arrays required many players to operate, with some even requiring the efforts of dozens of players. Apart from magic arrays, there was only one other method players could utilize mana domains. Normally, players would have to reach the peak of Tier 4 before they even had a chance of creating a mana domain of their own. Even then, the players who managed to acquire a mana domain at Tier 4 were still few and far between. Meanwhile, acquiring a mana domain at Tier 3 was a feat of legends. Any player who managed to create a mana domain at Tier 3 would be invincible among those below Tier 4. However, before Qin Wuchen and the others could recover from their shock, Shi Feng had already started his attack. Normally, swordsmen would try to avoid fighting against groups of enemies since the swordsman class focused more on single-target combat than group combat. However, Shi Feng did not back down from the half-orc warrior's charge. Unsheathing his two swords, Shi Feng charged at the oncoming half-orc warriors without hesitation. The demonized half-orc warriors were 6-meter-tall giants wielding great swords of similar sizes to them. Whether it was Shi Feng or the long swords he wielded, both looked tiny and harmless in comparison. Yet, when Shi Feng's long swords clashed with the half-orc warriors' great swords, the great swords had shockingly altered their trajectories from Shi Feng and struck the half-orc fighters near them instead. -734,644. -1,432,154. -713,464. Immediately, damage values in the hundreds of thousands appeared above some of the half-orc fighters' heads, some even exceeding 1 million. All of a sudden, the half-orc warriors had gone from being formidable enemies into becoming weapons for Shi Feng. Moreover, the damage output of each of these weapons far exceeded the damage output of the average Tier 3 expert party. It should be noted that the monsters in the miniature ancient world possessed much tougher bodies than monsters on the main continent. A Tier 3 berserker fully geared in level 100 dark gold equipment would be fortunate to cause 40,000 damage to a level 100 high lord with their normal attacks. Even if the berserker used a Tier 3 skill, he would, at most, cause around 100,000 damage. However, Tier 3 skills and spells had cooldowns, and most Tier 3 players would only have a handful of Tier 3 skills and spells in their arsenal. It was impossible for players to continuously attack using Tier 3 skills and spells. Thus, a 6-man party would need a long time to defeat even a level 100 High Lord. Yet, now, Shi Feng needed less than a minute to defeat a demonized half-orc fighter. Every attack Shi Feng redirected from a half-orc warrior would hit at least 3 half-orc fighters. As a result, the half-orc fighter's 50 million HP could be seen rapidly decreasing. Even though these demonized half-orcs possessed frightening recovery and could regenerate 2% of their HP every 5 seconds, the amount of HP they recovered was nothing in the face of Shi Feng's damage output. How is this possible? This scene momentarily stupefied Wu Lingling. As the younger sister of Wu Xiaoxiao, the God's Domain Academy's top talent, she had watched many spars between the experts of first-rate guilds before. She had also watched Tier 4 experts grinding out in the fields before. However, none of those experts could manipulate 30-plus great lords and use them as their puppets like Shi Feng. The degree of awareness and control Shi Feng had over his surroundings was simply astounding. Even powerful great lords were nothing but a joke in front of him. However, what Wu Lingling didn't know was that while a monodomain could indeed grant players a significant advantage in manipulating their surroundings, if the difference in basic attributes was too significant, even a monodomain would be of no use. Meanwhile, the demonized half-orc warrior's basic attributes wasn't exceptional among great lords of the same level. On the contrary, the half-orc warriors had average basic attributes for great lords. Rather than basic attributes, the part that made them difficult opponents was their combat standards. Meanwhile, a competition of combat standards was the thing that Shi Feng worried about the least. Thus, he could toy with these demonized half-orcs as if he were messing around with puppets. If Shi Feng were to go up against great lords with basic attributes rivaling grand lords, though, even he would have no choice but to evade the monster's attacks. He would simply be seeking a quick death if he tried to divert their attacks. After Shi Feng fought for some time, he took a glance at Wu Lingling and the others. Then, he said in the team chat, "Don't just look at me, pay attention to your targets. Although I am suppressing the mobility and basic attributes of these demonized half-orcs with my monodomain, their combat instincts remain unaffected. Their basic attributes are also not at a level where you can casually block their attacks. I won't be able to save you if you get hit." Upon hearing Shi Feng's reminder, Wu Lingling and the others quickly snapped out of their daze and focused their attention on the half-orc fighters in front of them. Sweat had also started covering their foreheads as reality dawned upon them. They had been so shocked by Shi Feng's monodomain just now that they had forgotten that it only helped in weakening the enemy, it didn't prevent one from taking damage. Not to mention, this monodomain didn't even belong to them, so it didn't provide them with any performance enhancements. Shi Feng might have stabilized the situation on his side already, but what about them? What should they do against their respective opponents? They were talking about a level 100 High Lord in the miniature ancient world here. Even frontline Tier 3 experts had difficulty fighting a one-on-one battle against a level 100 High Lord. What could students like themselves, who couldn't even be considered experts, do against such an opponent? Don't panic. The maximum reach of these half-orc fighters' normal attacks is 12 yards, and they can only attack up to 6 times in a row. Afterward, they will fall into a brief moment of stagnation to catch their breath. Their speed is no match for yours, neither is their reaction speed. Use this knowledge to find opportunities to attack. While the many students wondered how they should fight against the demonized half-orc fighters before them, Shi Feng's voice rang in their ears once more. An attack range of 12 yards and a maximum attack count of 6? Qin Wuchen's eyes brightened when he heard Shi Feng's advice, the worry on his face lessening. The scariest part about fighting monsters in God's domain was not knowing the limits of a monster. In God's domain, monsters possessed intelligence and were afraid of death. Thus, they would hide their strength in battle, only exposing their limits when necessary. In a way, this was similar to how players fought. Normally, Qin Wuchen and the others would gradually probe the limits of the monsters they fought over the course of the battle. However, they dared not conduct such casual probings with the demonized half-orc fighters since the other party possessed far superior basic attributes. They would die if they made a mistake. However, now that they knew about the half-orc fighters' limits, their confidence grew. It was akin to having a lamp shine on them as they were walking down a dark road. They now knew what they should do to achieve victory. Subsequently, the students began maintaining a 12-yard gap between themselves and their opponents, preventing any of the half-orc fighters' normal attacks from reaching them. Now, they only had to pay attention to when the half-orc fighters used their skills. The half-orc fighters' movements when using skills were vastly different from when they were attacking normally. Thus, it was very easy to tell when they were attacking with a skill. All the students needed to do was figure out how they should dodge these skills. For a time, the students, who were originally at an absolute disadvantage, began holding their ground against the demonized half-orc fighters, neither side getting the better over the other. The more talented of the bunch had even started retaliating against the half-orc fighters, inflicting some damage to the High Lords. Of these talented students, Wu Lingling's performance stood out the most. She grew braver and more excited with every passing moment. Although Wu Lingling had previously sparred with the experts of her elder sister's guild, those experiences did very little in helping her improve. Even though the experts she fought had matched their basic attributes with hers, there was simply too huge a gap in combat standards and techniques. Thus, she could never last more than a few moves against these experts. However, it was a different story for the demonized half-orc fighter before her. Currently, the High Lord was no match for her in terms of reaction speed and mobility, so she could see its movements with perfect clarity. The half-orc fighter's combat standard was also only superior to hers by a small margin, so she could quickly discern her flaws through the half-orc fighter's attacks. As the battle progressed, Wu Lingling could tell that she was improving. Subsequently, time passed by quickly. After battling continuously for several hours and killing several groups of demonized half-orcs, Shi Feng and the others saw their experience bars rising by 15% or more. The half-orc warriors they killed had also dropped plenty of equipment. Originally, Wu Lingling and the others weren't particularly interested in the equipment dropped. After all, the demonized half-orc warriors only dropped level 100 secret silver equipment. Meanwhile, every one of them was fully equipped in level 100 fine gold equipment, with some even fully equipped in dark gold equipment. Thus, the half-orc warriors' loot held no significance to them. However, when Shi Feng shared the statistics of the weapons and equipment dropped, everyone's eyes immediately turned red with desire. Crap! These things buff mana affinity. Qin Wuchen was greatly shocked when he saw the statistics of the level 100 secret silver weapons and equipment Shi Feng shared. In the current God's domain, even epic weapons and equipment rarely had attributes that increased the user's mana affinity. Yet, now, even the secret silver equipment the demonized half-orc warriors dropped could increase players' mana perception and mana affinity. Although these secret silver weapons and equipment was a measly 5% improvement to mana perception and mana affinity, they could probably sell for more than even level 100 dark gold weapons. Some people might even be willing to trade level 100 epic weapons for these secret silver weapons and equipment. After all, mana was everything in God's domain. There were many people in God's domain who'd be willing to spill blood just to acquire a piece of equipment that improved mana affinity. Depending on the item's quality, some guilds were even willing to wage war with each other. This was because a boost in mana perception and mana affinity could make it much easier for players to ascend through the tiers. Now that such an effect had appeared on a bunch of level 100 secret silver weapons and equipment, how could Qin Wuchen not be shocked? Meanwhile, after taking a glance at the dozen or so secret silver weapons and equipment, Shi Feng said to his students, "There isn't a significant difference in basic attributes between secret silver and fine gold equipment. I recommend that you swap out your fine gold equipment for this secret silver equipment. These things should be of much greater help to you in improving your techniques." To be honest, even Shi Feng was surprised that the Withered Ruins monsters could drop such weapons and equipment. If the outside world were to find out about this, the various large guilds would flood the regional dungeon. They might even lock down the area to monopolize these items. Upon hearing Shi Feng's words, the students quickly allocated the loot and replaced their old equipment. Then, the group of students continued following Shi Feng into the Withered Ruins inner region, slaughtering any demonized half-orcs they came across on the way. Because of their increase in magic affinity, Wu Lingling and the others saw a visible improvement in the completion rate of their skills and spells. They could also move their bodies much more naturally, which, in turn, improved their combat standards. After battling for over 10 hours, Shi Feng and the others arrived in front of the city wall that separated the Withered Ruins' inner and outer regions. Apart from Shi Feng's team of 31 players, there was another team of 200 players resting a short distance away. Meanwhile, this 200-man team was none other than the Soulfire Adventurer team Wu Lingling and the others encountered at the Withered Ruins entrance. Soulfire's members were currently huddled around campfires, eating and drinking to recover their stamina and concentration. It was evident that they planned to head to the inner region to grind. When Shi Feng's team arrived at the inner region's entrance, they immediately attracted the attention of Soulfire's members. When the woman wielding the crystalline epic staff saw Shi Feng's team, a look of surprise flashed across her face, and she couldn't help but mutter, "How is this possible? What's wrong, Rain?" Southern Tiger, who had been resting with his eyes shut, asked when he heard the woman's words. "Captain! Look at them," the woman named Moon Rain said as she pointed at Shi Feng's team. Hearing this, Southern Tiger followed Moon Rain's finger and looked over to Shi Feng's team. Immediately, surprise flashed across Southern Tiger's eyes. Level 101. Chapter 16, Tier 5 Existence. In front of the wall that led to the Withered Ruins inner region, Southern Tiger, Moon Rain, and the other members of Soulfire couldn't help but be shocked when they saw Shi Feng's team. Level 101. How can their team reach this place? Questions appeared in the minds of Soulfire's members one after another. Some of them even rubbed their eyes, thinking that they were hallucinating. "Captain, could they be monsters disguised as players?" Moon Rain asked in a quiet voice as she warily looked at Shi Feng's team. Moon Rain had scrutinized Wu Lingling and the other students at the dungeon's entrance, so she knew what kind of combat standards they possessed. Let alone reaching the Withered Ruins inner region, these students would be fortunate if they could last even half an hour in the outer region. Yet, now, not only did Wu Lingling and the others reach the inner region's entrance, but they had even managed to level up within this short period. Moreover, none of them looked to be in a miserable state. No matter how Moon Rain looked at this situation, she couldn't help but find it unbelievable. Instances of monsters disguising themselves as players were not unheard of, and monsters capable of such disguises were incredibly dangerous in God's domain. This was because these monsters were not only highly intelligent, but they were also capable of devouring players. Meanwhile, players that were devoured would not only be prevented from logging into the game for half a month, but they would also permanently lose a small portion of their basic attributes. To make matters worse, even high-ranking identification skills did not work on these monsters. One would need a top-tier identification skill to see through their disguises. Meanwhile, out of the 200 players in their team, only Southern Tiger owned a top-tier identification skill. "No, they are indeed the people we met at the entrance. They aren't disguised monsters," Southern Tiger said, shaking his head. Then, in a confused voice, he continued, "I'm not sure if my senses are playing tricks on me, but I feel that they have undergone a slight transformation since we last met them." Transformation. Moon Rain started paying closer attention to Wu Lingling and the others after hearing Southern Tiger's words. "Is it their equipment?" Southern Tiger was one of Soulfire's 16 captains. While he might not be the strongest captain, he was the best when judging people. If Southern Tiger said that a person had changed, it was almost certainly true. However, even after scrutinizing Wu Lingling and the others for some time, Moon Rain failed to see any substantial change in these students. Apart from their levels, the only difference she could see in these students was their equipment. Moreover, it wasn't a positive change, but a negative one instead. Initially, these students had been fully equipped with fine gold and dark gold weapons and equipment. Yet, now, many of them had secret silver weapons and equipment mixed in their gear. If Moonrain was meeting these students for the first time, she would have mistakenly assumed that they were players who had recreated their accounts. It's not their equipment. It's their attitude that has changed, Southern Tiger said. Then, after taking a moment to think, he continued, yes. It's their composure. Every one of them looks much more composed now than before. Composure. Moonrain took another look at Wu Lingling and the others. Thanks to Southern Tiger's hint, realization quickly hit her. If Moonrain were to equate the students she saw at the dungeon's entrance as frightened rabbits, the students she was looking at now were akin to seasoned hunters. Even after arriving at the inner region's entrance, Wu Lingling and the others behaved calmly and showed no sense of crisis. Meanwhile, this was a strange sight no matter how Moonrain looked at it. The Withered Ruins was a hell mode regional dungeon. Even frontline experts would need to remain at high alert when roaming in the dungeon's outer region, let alone the area close to the inner region's entrance. Even their team was no exception. Although they were currently resting in front of the inner region's entrance, none of them had loosened their guard. This was because even the slightest mistake could lead to the annihilation of their team, which would, in turn, waste all of the efforts they had put into grinding previously. However, Wu Lingling and the others currently behaved as if they were on a sightseeing trip. None of them showed any signs of crisis whatsoever. Maybe they didn't encounter any monsters on the way here? Moonrain asked. The change in the behavior of Wu Lingling's group was simply too unbelievable. No matter how she racked her mind, she couldn't figure out what gave these students the confidence to behave so calmly in front of the dangerous inner region's entrance. The only reasonable explanation Moonrain could come up with was that these students had not encountered any monsters on the way here. After all, players would be teleported to a random location when they entered the dungeon. It might be possible that Wu Lingling and the others had been teleported to a safe location, thus explaining their calm behavior. However, Southern Tiger couldn't help but roll his eyes at Moonrain when he heard her words. Then, he said, if they didn't encounter any monsters, do you think they could reach level 101 before us? Ah, you're right. Moonrain immediately realized the flaw in her explanation. However, this outcome only served to further confuse her. But how can they reach this place so quickly with their strength? We have a 200-man team while their team only has 31 players. Moreover, every one of them is so weak. Although the Withered Ruins teleportation was random, those teleported to the outer region wouldn't be transported anywhere close to the inner region. Moreover, the closer one got to the inner region, the more monsters one would encounter. Moonrain found it hard to believe that a team as weak and small as Wu Lingling's group could reach the inner region's entrance so quickly. My guess is that it is related to that male swordsman, Southern Tiger said as he shifted his gaze to Shi Feng. Then, a hint of fighting spirit appeared in his eyes as he continued, it's been a long time since I came across such a powerful expert. I didn't think I would actually meet one in the miniature ancient world. Moonrain followed Southern Tiger's gaze and looked at Shi Feng as well. However, when she saw Shi Feng's terrible equipment and sensed his lack of presence, she couldn't help but grow confused and asked, he's an expert. Even the average Tier 4 expert could easily secure themselves a full set of level 100 epic equipment when they entered a miniature ancient world, let alone someone capable of being regarded as an expert by Southern Tiger. In God's domain, anyone Southern Tiger regarded as an expert would be at the half-step Tier 5 standard at the very least. Meanwhile, such experts were existences capable of serving as the cornerstones of first-rate guilds. These existences could easily get a 1,000-man expert team to help them level up should they choose to do so. Yet, what about Shi Feng? Not only was he geared in secret silver equipment, but the team he led only had 31 players. To make matters worse, his teammates were nothing but children with immature combat standards. If she were to tell others that a half-step Tier 5 expert was using such equipment and leading such a team, others would probably call her out as crazy. It's normal that you can't tell. Real experts will never show their true colors. Whether it is their killing intent or aura, they will only reveal these things when they take action, as this is a sign that they have perfect control over their bodies, Southern Tiger said, chuckling when he saw Moonrain's skepticism. Seeing that he can conceal his aura to such an extent, I'm guessing that his combat standard might be at the level of Blue Smiles. How is that possible? Moonrain couldn't help but look at Southern Tiger skeptically. Not only was Blue Smile Soulfire's honorary elder, but she was also a Tier 5 Guardian Knight. She was one of Soulfire's strongest combatants, and her combat standard had already reached an inhuman level. So, Moonrain found it unbelievable that an expert of Blue Smile's caliber had entered the miniature ancient world and was even grinding together with a bunch of children. Seeing that Moonrain still doubted him, Southern Tiger did not try to persuade her further. This was because even he wasn't sure about his conjecture. After all, Tier 5 experts were esteemed individuals in God's domain. These experts were typically busy searching for ways of getting promoted to Tier 6. There was no way they would casually abandon their past achievements to enter the miniature ancient world. Meanwhile, during the time Moonrain and Southern Tiger were conversing with each other, Shi Feng's group had also arrived in front of the city wall that measured several dozen meters in height. Then, when Wu Lingling and the other students saw Soulfire's team resting in front of the wall, every one of them grew ecstatic. Instructor Shi is amazing. We actually caught up to Soulfire's exploration progress. I'm definitely going to boast about this to my old classmates. I'm not dreaming, right? We out-leveled Soulfire's team. Previously, when Wu Lingling and the others had been continuously slaughtering demonized half-orcs with Shi Feng and refining their combat standards, they already knew that their leveling speed had surpassed that of the average expert. However, they never thought that their leveling speed would surpass Soulfire's team. However, before everyone could get too excited, Shi Feng suddenly said, "Everyone, quiet down. It's getting late, so we will log off here for today. We'll proceed to the inner region after the Academy's enrollment ceremony, so make sure to rest up." When everyone heard Shi Feng's words, they couldn't help but grumble in complaint. They felt that it was still too early to rest. After all, they were still brimming with energy, and there were still 2 hours left until the enrollment ceremony. So, they eagerly suggested that they enter the inner region now. By doing so, not only could they enter the inner region before Soulfire's team, but they could even hone their techniques against stronger monsters. However, Shi Feng shot down every one of his students' suggestions. Players in God's domain might be able to mitigate their fatigue using stamina and concentration recovery potions, but these items did not reduce the mental stress they experienced. After grinding continuously for so many hours, everyone's minds had long since entered an incredibly tense state. If he let his students fight in such a state, they wouldn't achieve any significant improvements. Rather than wasting time trying to achieve negligible improvements, it'd be better if everyone got some rest now. That way, they would be able to explore the inner region with much greater efficiency afterward. Faced with Shi Feng's rejection, Wu Lingling and the others had no choice but to log out and rest. After all, they'd be committing suicide if they insisted on going into the inner region without Shi Feng. After seeing all 30 of his students log out, Shi Feng chose to rest as well. Today would be the first day he officially began his duties as one of the God's Domain Academy's instructors. After all, he could no longer act with as much freedom as he did in his previous life. However, as the mansion Shi Feng lived in was quite distant from the God's Domain Academy, by the time he arrived, there were only 15 minutes left until the enrollment ceremony began. He had just barely arrived on time. Originally, Shi Feng didn't think much of the enrollment ceremony. However, when he entered Jinhai University's indoor arena, he couldn't help but be surprised by the scale of the enrollment ceremony. What's going on? At this time, Not only were there over 1,000 students standing in the arena, but there were also many executives of first and second-rate guilds seated on the spectator stands. Based on the seating arrangements, there should be at least 30 guilds present. Rather than an enrollment ceremony, it looked more like a fighting competition was being held here. Meanwhile, when Shi Feng arrived at the seats reserved for instructors, the several dozen instructors present immediately turned to look at Shi Feng and began a quiet discussion among themselves. So, he's Shi Feng? The ex-guild leader of Shadow. I didn't think he would dare show himself. Does he not know that Gu Yiren is attending the ceremony in person today? Maybe he thinks that Wu Lingling can win against Gu Yiren's cousin. She is one of the few freshmen capable of rivaling Gu Tong, after all. He must be dreaming. Wu Lingling might stand a chance in a one-on-one fight, but the competition is a team battle. Gu Tong has 2 other talented freshmen on his team, while Wu Lingling has nobody. There is no way Wu Lingling can hold off 3 people by herself. I heard that Gu Yiren has personally come here to watch his cousin secure the championship for the freshman competition today. If Gu Tong secures the championship, he will become an unofficial internal member of Shadow and get the opportunity to visit the Secret Pavilion's branch headquarters. Many of the instructors present secretly ridiculed Shi Feng for his shamelessness and overestimating himself when they saw him attending the enrollment ceremony. After all, even though he had already been dismissed from Shadow, he still planned to rely on Wu Lingling, whom Shi Feng had tricked into becoming his student, to increase his reputation. Meanwhile, Luo Tiancheng couldn't help but smirk gleefully when he thought of what was to come. Let's see how you embarrass yourself when you try to compare with guild leader Gu. Amidst the various instructors' quiet discussions, the God's Domain Academy's enrollment ceremony officially began. After the Academy's director finished her speech, the executives of the various attending guilds also went up the stage to give a short speech. The sweet promises these executives made excited the freshmen present, and many of them couldn't help but wish they could join these large guilds immediately. Meanwhile, after the various guild executives finished their speeches, the highly anticipated freshman competition also officially began. Immediately, the mood in the arena soared to its peak. Instructor Shi, did you properly read the competition rules I emailed you? At this time, Lin Yeyu, who was wearing a black suit that emphasized her enchanting body, approached Shi Feng and asked in confusion, "Are you sure you want to let Wu Lingling participate by herself?" Chapter 17, One Person. Although Lin Yeyu had spoken softly, the instructors present were seated nearby. Moreover, Lin Yeyu's existence in the God's Domain Academy was akin to a celebrity. No matter where she appeared, she would become the center of attention of every instructor. Thus, the instructors present all heard Lin Yeyu's words clearly. For a time, every instructor present couldn't help but shift their line of sight toward Shi Feng, surprise and confusion in their eyes. He's sending only Wu Lingling? What is he trying to do? Did he not read the rules properly? Does he think it's going to be one-on-one fights? Most of the instructors present had done some research on Shi Feng's situation. On one side, there was Shi Feng, Shadow's dismissed guild leader. On the other side, there was Gu Yiren, Shadow's newly promoted guild leader. Since Gu Yiren was here to show support to his younger cousin Gu Tong in the freshman competition, the competition could be said to be Shi Feng's best opportunity to one-up Gu Yiren and show his worth in the God's Domain Academy. Shi Feng even had the necessary conditions to achieve this goal. So long as he paired the incredibly talented Wu Lingling with 2 other talented students, he would have a high chance to win against Gu Yiren. Yet, now, Shi Feng was letting Wu Lingling participate by herself? It should be known that Wu Lingling and Gu Tong had similar results in the entrance evaluation. Both had reached the trial tower's 5th floor early stage. So, the 2 could be regarded as evenly matched, and it wouldn't be strange for any of them to win against each other. Although Gu Tong's teammates were stronger than any of Shi Feng's other students, Wu Lingling still had a winning chance so long as she had reliable teammates to support her. Although the competition's rules did not state that participating teams needed to have 3 members, sending a one-man team to participate was no different from forfeiting the competition. Instructor Luo, do you think that Instructor Shi got scared after experiencing Guild Leader Gu's frightening aura? A young junior instructor sitting beside Luo Tiancheng asked. Then, he smirked and continued, even if he's unwilling to embarrass himself and forfeit the match, there's no need to have Wu Lingling participate by herself. If Wu Xiaoxiao learns of this, his career as an instructor will probably come to an end. Everyone capable of enrolling into the God's Domain Academy possessed a certain degree of talent. Even if Wu Lingling was superior to her peers, she hadn't reached a level where she could fight multiple opponents by herself. Not to mention, having teammates meant that one could execute many more strategic maneuvers. Thus, Wu Lingling would face an overwhelming defeat even if she fought in a 2-on-1 matchup, let alone a 3-on-1 matchup. Wu Xiaoxiao, one of the God's Domain Academy's brightest students, definitely wouldn't be willing to watch her little sister suffer a miserable defeat. Even if everyone could understand the reason for Wu Lingling's miserable defeat, it still wouldn't sound nice when others talked about it. Meanwhile, if a top student like Wu Xiaoxiao tried to seek justice for this matter, the academy would probably fire Shi Feng without hesitation. After all, Shi Feng was merely a newly hired junior instructor. In regards to this situation, Luo Tiancheng glanced at Shi Feng and sneered, saying, "You can't say that about Instructor Shi. Who knows? Instructor Shi might be aiming to replicate Senior Instructor Qi achievements several semesters ago and make a name for himself in this freshman competition. How is that possible?" Instructor Qi was in charge of the Academy's Golden Duo at the time. Although Wu Lingling is a genius in her own right, she is still only one person, the young junior instructor said, shaking his head. However, he also understood that Luo Tiancheng was trying to ridicule Shi Feng, so he didn't continue detailing the matter. In reality, there had been many past instances where instructors would send only 1 or 2 students to represent them in the freshman competition. However, out of the many instructors who did so, only Instructor Qi had ever secured the championship. Moreover, his achievement was largely attributed to his 2 students being twins. Not only did these twins have incredible talent, but they also had extraordinary coordination. Thus, they managed to win despite fighting in 2-on-3 matchups. However, Wu Lingling's situation was different. She didn't even have someone to rely on, let alone a twin sibling. In such a situation, she wouldn't even get through the preliminary round, let alone winning against Gu Tong's team of 3. In the meantime, Shi Feng ignored the discussions taking place around him and calmly nodded to Lin Yeyu, saying, just her. It won't be interesting if I send too many. It won't be interesting." Lin Yeyu was momentarily stunned when she heard Shi Feng's answer. Her mind failed to comprehend what Shi Feng was trying to say. As for the instructors seated nearby, they laughed when they heard Shi Feng's answer. It won't be interesting if he sends too many? Does he think it's interesting to watch 3 people gang up on one person, then? Could he be insane? I don't know whether Instructor Shi is insane, but I do know he'll go insane once Wu Xiaoxiao finds out about this. The many instructors present discussed and laughed over Shi Feng's words. Some instructors also started to look forward to the end of the competition. After all, nobody in the academy had ever seen Wu Xiaoxiao go berserk before. However, they might just get the opportunity to see it this time. While a commotion was taking place over the instructors' seating area, the academy's dean also officially announced the start of the freshman competition. The competition's format was simple. There were 6 virtual gaming pods prepared in the center of the arena, and participating teams would fight each other in the virtual realm. There was also a holographic screen projected above the gaming pods to allow spectators to see the fights. Participants would automatically receive a virtual body with a level 100 Tier 3 physique and weapons and equipment of similar quality when they entered the virtual realm. Afterward, all they needed to do was select their classes, and they would be automatically teleported into a randomized battlefield that spanned a radius of 200 yards. Unlike the professional league, the freshman competition was a contest of skills and tactics. Meanwhile, after the dean explained the competition rules, he also revealed the list of participating students and their respective teams. Then, when Wu Lingling saw the teammates she had, or lack thereof, she couldn't help but have a huge headache. Is Instructor she insane? Wu Lingling was a little stunned when she saw that Shi Feng's team only had her name in it. Although she had long since known that she would be chosen to participate in the competition, she never thought she would do so without even a single support. As soon as Wu Lingling snapped out of her daze, she immediately tried to call Shi Feng and ask him why he was having her participate by herself. Wu Lingling admitted that her combat standard had improved significantly after her training session in the Withered Ruins. He had also learned many evasive maneuvers from Shi Feng, which elevated her dodging standard to a whole new level. However, she hadn't gotten so arrogant as to think she could go up against 3 opponents simultaneously. Even if all 3 of her opponents were freshmen capable of only reaching the trial tower's 4th floor, it didn't matter. In a situation where all participants had similar basic attributes, weapons, and equipment, so long as the other party didn't foolishly take independent action, their victory against her would be guaranteed. However, before Wu Lingling could call Shi Feng, the holographic screen in the middle of the arena revealed the first matchup of the competition. Upon seeing the matched teams, the entire arena instantly fell silent. As if fate was toying with her, Wu Lingling had gotten matched against Gu Tong's team in the very first round. The matchup that everyone thought would only appear in the final round had actually appeared in the first round. Hey? Wu Lingling doesn't have any teammates. Wu Lingling is participating by herself? Is she insane? Surprise and confusion flashed across Gu Tong's eyes when he saw the information displayed on the holographic screen. Out of the 1,000 or so freshmen this year, the only person Gu Tong acknowledged as his rival was Wu Lingling, Wu Xiaoxiu's younger sister. As for everyone else, he placed no importance on them at all. Once he defeated Wu Lingling, he even planned to challenge Wu Xiaoxiu before graduating, becoming a legend in the God's Domain Academy. While everyone was still trying to process this situation, the mechanical voice of the competition's administrative system echoed throughout the arena. May the participants of both teams enter the virtual gaming cabins. The match will begin in 1 minute. The mechanical voice interrupted everyone's thoughts. When Wu Lingling saw Gu Tong's team walking to the gaming cabins, she gritted her teeth and swiftly made her way to the center of the arena as well. Then, she laid down into a gaming cabin and entered the virtual arena. While both teams were waiting for the timer to count down and the system to teleport them to a random battlefield, Gu Tong's team members couldn't help but look at Gu Tong and ask, "Boss Gu, should we step aside and let you fight Wu Lingling one-on-one?" The two of them knew that Gu Tong had originally planned to utilize his victory against Wu Lingling to increase his reputation in shadow. However, now that Wu Lingling was participating by herself, it'd be meaningless even if the 3 of them won against her. No. Gu Tong shook his head. Then, in a definitive tone, he said, "We'll fight together. Since Wu Lingling has given up on the competition, she is no longer worthy of being my rival." Chapter 18 Shocking Technique. Gu Tong's words were cold and determined, and even his teammates could feel his anger and disdain for Wu Lingling. "Bing Xiao, you support from range once the match begins. Lai Yun, you keep her distracted with feints. I'll land the finishing blow on her," Gu Tong said to his teammates as he unsheathed his 2 daggers. "However, make sure to be careful when you attack her, Lai Yun. Wu Lingling might be a swordsman, but she's even more agile than an assassin. She also has numerous attack patterns. Make sure you do not get caught up with her for too long. It doesn't matter even if your strength is greater than hers. You won't be able to cope with her attacks once the fight prolongs." "I understand. You can rest assured, Boss Gu," Lai Yun, a berserker who was nearly 2 meters tall and clad in armor, said and nodded. Lai Yun was well aware of Wu Lingling's strengths. Even his instructor had praised Wu Lingling for her offensive capabilities in one-on-one combat. When it came to one-on-one combat, Wu Lingling was the undisputed number one among the freshmen this year, and even Gu Tong was slightly weaker than her in this regard. Meanwhile, Lai Yun couldn't last more than 10 seconds in a frontal confrontation against Gu Tong, so he'd be foolish to try to win against Wu Lingling by himself. Bing Xiao, when you're attacking Wu Lingling, you don't need to care about me or Lai Yun. Just make sure Wu Lingling cannot chain her attacks, Gu Tong said as he looked at the short-haired girl, who wielded a bow and wore light armor, standing beside Lai Yun. Many people are watching this competition. We cannot let Wu Lingling have any chances at showing us off. When the girl named Bing Xiao heard Gu Tong's words, her expression immediately sharpened. At this time, she and Lai Yun had already been recognized as reserve internal members of Shadow. Meanwhile, the treatment they would receive as internal members would depend on their performance in today's competition. While Gu Tong was discussing strategies with his teammates, the timer above the waiting area finished counting down. Immediately, the trio found themselves teleported into a forest and saw Wu Lingling, who wielded two long swords and was clad in light silver armor, standing beside a large tree that was around 100 yards away from them. Along with the start of the match, the spectators in the arena also started making a racket. It's finally starting. A forest? Wu Lingling might still have a chance after all. The question now is whether Gu Tong will go for a one-on-one fight. I heard that Gu Tong is treating Wu Lingling as his rival and that he intends on beating her to secure himself as number one among the freshmen. What a pity. If Wu Lingling's instructor wasn't that Shi Feng, we could have witnessed an interesting match today. The many students, instructors, and guild executives present held a hushed discussion as they looked at the holographic display with great interest. After Wu Xiaoxiao, Wu Lingling's, and Gu Tong's names received the most attention in the God's Domain Academy right now. Many people would also frequently compare the two with each other. Some people even believed that this generation's freshmen would lead the God's Domain Academy into its golden era because of these two students. However, to everyone's surprise and confusion, Wu Lingling had actually chosen to apprentice under Shadow's ex-guild leader. Now, because of Shi Feng, she even had to go up against Gu Tong's team of three all by herself. While the spectators outside were discussing among themselves, Gu Tong did not remain idle on the battlefield. Don't let her escape our sight. Bing Xiao, seal her movements. Lai Yun, charge with me. After arriving on the battlefield, Gu Tong immediately analyzed the battlefield and shouted instructions to his teammates. Simultaneously, he activated his stealth skill and charged at Wu Lingling without hesitation. When Lai Yun heard Gu Tong's command, he instantly reacted and activated the Tier 3 flame charge, transforming into a huge ball of flames that charged at Wu Lingling. As for Bing Xiao, she drew her longbow and used the Tier 3 wind wings against Wu Lingling. Then, as soon as she released her bow, 8 arrows shot out of her bow and transformed into blades of wind that flew at Wu Lingling from multiple directions, cutting off Wu Lingling's paths of escape. When Luo Tiancheng, who sat in the spectator stands, saw the actions of Gu Tong's team, he couldn't help but sneer and think, as expected of the guild leader's little brother. Beautifully done. Originally, Luo Tiancheng had still been rather worried that Gu Tong would grow soft-hearted against his opponent and choose to fight Wu Lingling one-on-one. If that happened, it would give Wu Lingling a significantly greater chance of winning. That, in turn, would improve Shi Feng's performance as an instructor. Thankfully, Gu Tong did not choose to fight Wu Lingling one-on-one. Moreover, he had even wisely instructed his teammate to seal off Wu Lingling's paths of retreat. Now, Wu Lingling had no choice but to clash against Gu Tong's team of 3. In such a situation, Gu Tong's team was almost certain to win. It might even become a landslide victory. If that happened, Wu Xiaoxiao, the Academy's top talent, would definitely come and find trouble with Shi Feng. Meanwhile, when Lin Yeyu saw the development on the battlefield, she couldn't help but frown and glance at Shi Feng, who sat in front of her. What is he thinking? Lin Yeyu couldn't help but be confused by Shi Feng's actions. While she wasn't interested in the affairs between Shi Feng and Shadow, that didn't mean she was willing to watch one of the Academy's top talents suffer a humiliating defeat in front of so many people. Moreover, Shi Feng had just arrived at the God's Domain Academy. Logically, if he wanted to raise his position in the Academy or prove his value to Shadow, he should cherish Wu Lingling a lot. After all, there had been many instances in the past where instructors of the Academy had received a huge promotion because of a talented student. This was also why the Academy's instructors were willing to sacrifice a lot of their time and resources into nurturing their students. However, no matter how Lin Yayu looked at the current situation, it did not seem like Shi Feng was trying to nurture Wu Lingling at all. On the contrary, he seemed to be trying to harm Wu Lingling's future. Back on the battlefield, Lai Yun had already arrived before Wu Lingling and swung his battle axe at her, the two-handed weapon releasing a blinding radiance and increasing in size as it made its way to Wu Lingling. At the same time, Gu Tong had used shadow steps and appeared behind Wu Lingling. Then, he brandished his daggers at Wu Lingling's back. Die! Combat technique, Phantom Snake. Immediately, the two gleaming daggers transformed into multiple phantom snakes that struck at Wu Lingling from various blind spots, the attacks seamlessly timed with Lai Yun's gigantified axe. How ruthless! The various instructors and guild executives were astonished when they saw Gu Tong and Lai Yun's joint assault. The two students' joint assault was something even veteran experts like themselves would have trouble dealing with if their basic attributes were equalized. This was because the two students were attacking with the intention of trading lives. In the case of Lai Yun, he was attacking Wu Lingling without paying any regard to his defense. He was fully intent on receiving any counterattacks Wu Lingling launched with his body. Moreover, to ensure his attack landed on Wu Lingling, he had even chosen to use an AoE skill with wide coverage. And seeing how close Gu Tong was to Wu Lingling, it would seem that Lai Yun intended on hitting Wu Lingling even at the cost of hitting Gu Tong. As for Gu Tong, he showed no intentions of dodging Lai Yun's attack, either. Instead, he focused all of his attention on striking Wu Lingling's weak points and sealing off any possible paths of retreat for the swordsman. In this situation, even if Wu Lingling had noticed Gu Tong's presence behind her, there was nothing she could do to avoid both Lai Yun's and Gu Tong's suicidal attacks. The only thing she could do was choose to dodge one of their attacks. However, no matter which attack Wu Lingling chose to evade, she would still end up getting killed by the other person's attack. Normally, in a 3-on-1 situation, the side with the numerical advantage wouldn't have chosen such a suicidal combat method. Instead, they would rely on their numerical advantage to suppress and whittle down their opponent. Yet, Gu Tong's team had chosen this suicidal combat method to ensure their victory and leave Wu Lingling with no opportunities to make a comeback. Back on the battlefield, even when Lai Yun's gigantified axe and Gu Tong's shadow snakes were about to devour Wu Lingling actually remained motionless, behaving as if she had not noticed the two attacks coming at her. Did she give up? Gu Tong couldn't help but be confused when he saw Wu Lingling's lack of reaction. In his opinion, an expert like Wu Lingling should more or less put up a struggle even when faced with such a hopeless situation. Yet, now. It seems I have overestimated you. Gu Tong said, his eyes filled with disappointment. At the same time, his hands also moved with greater speed as he planned to end this boring battle quickly. However, as soon as Gu Tong finished speaking, a crisp and sweet voice suddenly appeared from beside him. I think so as well. Gu Tong was startled when he heard this voice. This was because he couldn't be any more familiar with this voice. Wu Lingling. This was Wu Lingling's voice. Glancing at the source of the voice, Gu Tong immediately found himself stunned. Through the corner of his eyes, Gu Tong actually saw Wu Lingling standing a short distance away from him, behaving like a spectator as she watched him and Lai Yun executing their suicidal assault. Gu Tong wasn't the only one who saw this scene. Lai Yun and Bing Xiao also saw this scene. However, unlike Gu Tong, they quickly recovered from their shock and started shouting at Gu Tong to get out of the way in a panic. After all, with Lai Yun's combat standards, he was incapable of altering his attack trajectory this late into his attack. Meanwhile, a full-powered attack from a Tier 3 Berserker was not something a Tier 3 assassin could survive. So, Gu Tong's only chance to live now was to dodge Lai Yun's attack. Only, that evidently wasn't possible with Gu Tong's current state of mind. Meanwhile, when the various instructors and guild executives saw this scene, they couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Mirage Steps. Impossible. Mirage Steps is a top-tier footwork among basic combat techniques. Even veteran frontline experts have a hard time learning it. How can a freshman like Wu Lingling master it already? The many experts in the arena quickly understood the cause for two Wu Linglings to appear on the battlefield. Seeing as there were no fluctuations in the mana around Wu Lingling, the girl definitely did not use a skill or spell. Thus, the only explanation they could come up with for this situation was that Wu Lingling had executed Mirage Steps, a basic combat technique. However, Mirage Steps was a special footwork that even frontline experts had difficulty mastering. Anyone capable of mastering it would be regarded as a powerful expert even in first-rate guilds. Is this the reason for his confidence? At this time, even Lin Ye was surprised when she saw this scene, her eyes inadvertently turning to Shi Feng, who currently wore a calm expression on his face. Chapter 19 Monster. Most of the spectators in the arena were shocked when they saw the footwork Wu Lingling executed. The only exceptions were Qin Wuchen and the other students who had fought alongside Wu Lingling in the Withered Ruins. Their expressions remained calm throughout the entire process. Meanwhile, after seeing Wu Lingling's performance, Qin Wuchen's friend from high school enviously said to him, "So this is why you decided to follow a newbie instructor, Wuchen? I didn't know you had such a strong class rep. Her footwork is simply amazing. With her taking the lead, your class will be blessed when competing for school resources in the future." The God's Domain Academy might have abundant resources, it didn't mean that it could afford to waste them. Not to mention, the Academy's goal was to produce expert players. Thus, rather than treating all students equally, the Academy distributed its resources based on the students' performances. While this might seem like a harsh method of education, the world of experts in God's domain was cruel. Meanwhile, if students of the Academy wished to obtain more resources, apart from choosing a good instructor and working hard, they could also pray for capable classmates. This was because the Academy would hold monthly class competitions for resource distribution. In these monthly competitions, students from the classes ranked within the top 3 would each receive a bottle of A-rank nutrient fluid. They would also receive free access to the school's simulation training room for 3 days, allowing them to spar against simulated experts. Although the Academy's simulation training room was inferior to that of first-rate guilds, it was still significantly better than the simulation training room of most large guilds. However, as operating a simulation training room consumed high-level energy, even first-rate guilds experts had few opportunities to use it. Moreover, these experts typically had to pay a huge price to use their guild's simulation training rooms. Yet, the God's Domain Academy was offering this opportunity to its students for free. Thus, the Academy's monthly class competitions were extraordinarily intense. Meanwhile, having capable students like Wu Lingling in a class was sure to increase the class's chances of ranking within the monthly competition's top 3. Amazing footwork. Qin Wuchen couldn't help but look at his friend strangely. The class rep is simply evading Gu Tong and Lai Yun's joint assault normally. I don't know what those two are thinking. Why are they using such predictable attacks? They're not even comparable to the half-orc fighters. Or are they probing the class rep? Hearing Qin Wuchen's comments, Xiao Yuheng, another one of Shi Feng's students, nodded in agreement and said, "That's probably the case. The class rep is the only freshman who rivals Gu Tong, so Gu Tong must be checking to see if the class rep is qualified for him to get serious. But isn't this too simple of a probe? It feels like he is looking down on the class rep." Xiao Yuheng considered Wu Lingling's current performance to be standard. Wu Lingling was neither underperforming nor overperforming. After fighting in the withered ruins for over a dozen hours, Wu Lingling had already become capable of holding her ground against 3 demonized half-orc fighters. As for the other students in Shi Feng's class, while they couldn't match Wu Lingling's performance, they could still withstand the joint assault of 2 half-orc fighters. Meanwhile, the half-orc fighters' attack patterns were varied and constantly changing. It was especially true when they worked together. If one was not careful when going up against multiple half-orc fighters, one would quickly find themselves overwhelmed. However, Gu Tong and Lai Yun's joint assault was nothing like that. While Gu Tong and Lai Yun might seem to have good coordination with each other, their attack patterns were simple and predictable. So long as one grasped the timing of their attacks, it wouldn't be difficult to dodge their joint assault. In Xiao Yuheng's opinion, at least half of Shi Feng's class could dodge this joint assault, let alone Wu Lingling, the class's top student. As for the afterimages Wu Lingling created, that was merely the byproduct of an evasive maneuver, which was part of the aerobic exercise Shi Feng had taught them previously. The evasive maneuver required them to exert the muscles in their entire body during the moment of evasion, going from static to top speed instantly. Not only could the instantaneous burst of speed prevent their opponents from predicting the trajectory of their evasion and launching follow-up attacks, but it could also fool their opponent's vision, making their opponents see an afterimage of themselves. During the training session in the Withered Ruins, Shi Feng had already explained the theory behind this evasive maneuver to them. Meanwhile, the faster one could go from static to top speed, the more realistic one's afterimage. However, the fact that Wu Lingling had managed to create a realistic afterimage with her evasive maneuver shouldn't be regarded as anything amazing. On the contrary, the afterimage should be considered an unwanted byproduct instead. When a truly powerful expert executed an evasive maneuver, they wouldn't create any visual afterimages at all. Instead, they would vanish from their opponent's field of vision completely, their evasive technique making it so that their opponent's brain became unaware of their presence. To be precise, the evasive technique created visual signals so complex that the human brain couldn't process them. Thus, the brain would actively ignore such signals, thereby erasing the technique user's presence completely. Indeed, at least half of our class can dodge such a simple probing attempt. I honestly don't know what's going through Gu Tong's and Lai Yun's minds, Qin Wuchen said, nodding in agreement with Xiao Yuheng's comment. However, as soon as Qin Wuchen finished speaking, his high school classmate and the freshmen from other classes sitting nearby were immediately rendered speechless. Simple probing attempt? At least half the class could dodge it. Were they even speaking the same language? It should be known that Wu Lingling's current performance had amazed even the many guild executives present. Yet, Qin Wuchen and Xiao Yuheng regarded Wu Lingling's performance as nothing special. Did these two think everyone else was an idiot? While everyone was talking about Wu Lingling's footwork, Gu Tong had used the Tier 3 life-saving skill Shadowless Step to forcibly enter stealth. Then, he used the 0.5-second invulnerability period the skill provided to tank Lai Yun's attack, allowing him to avoid the awkward situation of getting heavily injured due to friendly fire. However, after using up his life-saving skill, Gu Tong fell into the predicament of having no means of escaping Wu Lingling's follow-up attacks. The assassin class wasn't designed for frontal combat. The class shined most when executing surprise attacks and dexterous combat methods. In contrast, not only was Wu Lingling's swordsman class adept at frontal combat, but Wu Lingling herself was also known for her agile combat style. Because of these factors, Gu Tong continuously lost HP when he clashed blades with Wu Lingling. And although Lai Yun was frantically trying to attack Wu Lingling from behind, Wu Lingling seemingly had eyes growing on the back of her head as she could always evade Lai Yun's attacks at the very last moment. In this situation, Lai Yun might as well not exist as his attacks were hardly doing anything to affect Wu Lingling's fight with Gu Tong. Damn it! How is she so strong? Has she been hiding her strength all this time? Feelings of frustration and confusion filled Gu Tong's heart as he desperately tried to defend against Wu Lingling's attacks. Lai Yun and Bing Xiao also experienced the same feelings when they saw Wu Lingling evade every one of their attacks with little effort. After the clash continued for around 20 seconds, Wu Lingling successfully whittled Gu Tong to death. As for Lai Yun and Bing Xiao, they didn't even last 20 seconds against Wu Lingling after losing their team's core. When the administrative system announced the end of the match, silence filled the arena's spectator stands as everyone turned to watch Wu Lingling climb out of her virtual gaming cabin, their eyes looking at Wu Lingling as if they were looking at a monster. Chapter 20 Merely a junior instructor. What a monstrous talent! Even the top talents of first-rate guilds can hold a candle to her. I never thought Wu Lingling's talent would actually surpass that of Wu Xiaoxiu's. Shortly after Wu Lingling exited her gaming cabin, voices of exclamation filled the arena. The Academy's instructors and various guild executives, in particular, looked at Wu Lingling as if she were their golden goose. As for Luo Tiancheng, his eyes were close to popping out of their sockets as he looked at Wu Lingling in utter disbelief. Impossible! How can Wu Lingling be this strong? Gu Tong, the younger cousin of Shadow's current guild leader Gu Yiren, had actually lost to Wu Lingling even while having a numerical advantage. After this incident, Shadow's plans to expand its influence in the God's Domain Academy had thoroughly become a joke. Meanwhile, unlike everyone else in the arena, Lin Yeyu did not focus her gaze on Wu Lingling. Instead, she looked at Shi Feng, who sat in front of her. So this was what he meant? Lin Yeyu had previously been confused when she heard Shi Feng saying, "It won't be interesting if I send too many." However, after witnessing this match, she found that Shi Feng's words indeed made sense. With Wu Lingling's strength, if the girl gained 2 more people to support her, the match probably would have ended as soon as it began. Gu Tong's team wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to put up any resistance, and the match wouldn't have lasted for several dozen seconds. However, after looking at Shi Feng for a moment, Lin Yeyu couldn't help but sigh and look at the man with a sympathetic gaze. Originally, Shi Feng could have relied on Wu Lingling to make a name for himself in the academy and even secure a respectable position in Jinhai City. Unfortunately, it was a sin to possess treasure without having the strength to protect it. In the current era, God's domain had already become a second world for people. In fact, its importance even surpassed that of the real world. After all, people could essentially double their lifespans by living in God's domain. Thus, God's domain had also become a place of competition for both individuals and competition. Meanwhile, organizations seeking to secure a better standing in God's domain needed to recruit highly talented individuals. Although Gu Tong was recognized as a genius by God's Domain Academy, he could only be regarded as such in a third-rate city like Jinhai City. One could find many other geniuses like him in the various first-rate guilds. Thus, none of the various first-rate guilds in God's domain had deemed it necessary to poach him before he met the Academy's requirements to join a guild. Previously, this was also the case for Wu Lingling. Although the first-rate guild Dazzlewave had already shown signs of trying to recruit Wu Lingling, that was only because of Wu Xiaoxiu's influence and Wu Lingling's relatively good talent. If it weren't for her elder sister, Wu Lingling definitely wouldn't have received such treatment. However, the situation was different now. The talent Wu Lingling displayed had already surpassed that of Wu Xiaoxiu, the Academy's current star, let alone Gu Tong. The various first-rate guilds would definitely fight to recruit such a talent. Shi Feng was merely a junior instructor at the academy who possessed no backing whatsoever. The academy wouldn't allow Shi Feng to nurture a top-tier talent like Wu Lingling. After all, Wu Lingling was the academy's chance to make a name for itself throughout the country. The academy's influential senior instructors probably wouldn't let go of this opportunity, either. Apart from Lin Yeyu, many of the intermediate instructors also looked at Shi Feng with sympathetic gazes. After all, every one of the academy's senior instructors had already run to the academy's dean by now, evidently trying to secure her as their apprentice. Moreover, senior instructor Qi was even among these people. Not only did instructor Qi possess deep ties with Shadow, but he was also Gu Tong's instructor. Although the Academy's rules indicated that students couldn't change their instructors for a year after they apprenticed themselves under an instructor, it wasn't impossible to circumvent this rule. So long as the students and instructors involved agreed to the change, students could change instructors at any time. As for top-tier geniuses like Wu Lingling, they wouldn't even need their instructors' consent to change instructors. Wu Zhenyang, who was seated in the VIP section, was presently experiencing a huge headache. Jinhai City's God's Domain Academy had 4 senior instructors, and every one of them was an influential individual in Jinhai City. They had nurtured many professional players throughout their career, and even the city's various large guilds respected them greatly. Yet, now, because of Wu Lingling's fight, all 4 of these senior instructors had come running to him in an attempt to secure Wu Lingling as their student. They didn't even care that there were a bunch of guild executives sitting around them. "Dean, this is the first time our academy has seen a student as talented as Wu Lingling. We must develop her using the best resources available." "That's right. Shi Feng is merely a newly hired junior instructor. He doesn't have any resources in God's domain, either. The responsibility of nurturing Wu Lingling is too heavy for him. You should leave it to me instead." "Dean, I've helped nurture many professional players for the academy these past few years, but I have never encountered a truly excellent sapling. How about letting me nurture Wu Lingling? I promise she will have a much brighter future than Wu Xiaoxiao. I can even guarantee that she will make it into the A-League." 3 of the 4 senior instructors blabbered away like desperate salesmen in front of Wu Zhenyang, their usual arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the various guild executives sitting nearby saw this scene, they couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. Meanwhile, shortly after the 3 senior instructors finished their sales talk, Instructor Qi, the youngest out of the 4 senior instructors, looked at Wu Zhenyang and solemnly said, "Wu Lingling's talent is exceptional, Dean. If you are willing to let Wu Lingling come under my wing, I promise to give her a training slot in World Domination's branch headquarters." As soon as Instructor Qi made his offer, the other 3 senior instructors and various guild executives couldn't help but gasp. None of them had expected Instructor Qi to be willing to pay such a huge price. As a super guild, World Domination was a bona fide titan in God's domain. It was an existence that far surpassed the various first-rate guilds. Although they had no idea how Instructor Qi had managed to form a connection with a super guild like World Domination, the fact that he was willing to part with a training slot in World Domination was simply absurd. Even if it was only a branch headquarters training slot, it was still something countless geniuses sought to obtain. The training one could acquire through this training slot was something no first-rate guild could ever hope to provide. If Wu Lingling could receive World Domination's training slot, her future would be limitless. This Wu Zhenyang hesitated to make a decision. After thinking for a long time, he looked at the 4 senior instructors in front of him and said, "I cannot arbitrarily agree to your requests. This matter requires the approval of Instructor Shi and Wu Lingling herself. If the 2 of them agree to the change, I won't have any problems with it, either. Is that so?" Wu Zhenyang's words put the 4 senior instructors into thought for a moment. Then, without saying anything more, the 4 of them turned around and left. Wu Zhenyang had already made it clear with his words that he did not wish to offend anyone and that he wouldn't meddle in this affair. Thus, it was up to them to persuade Wu Lingling to become their apprentice. As for Shi Feng, he was a non-factor. He was merely a junior instructor in the academy, after all. He had nothing to offer Wu Lingling. According to the rumors they heard, he was even someone dismissed by Shadow. So long as Wu Lingling agreed to become their apprentice, it wouldn't matter even if Shi Feng opposed the change. After the 4 senior instructors left the VIP section, Wu Zhenyang and the various guild executives returned their attention to the central display. However, after witnessing the match between Wu Lingling and Gu Tong's team, it became a little boring to watch the matches of the other students. 2 hours later, the freshman competition ended without any suspense. To nobody's surprise, Wu Lingling became the competition's champion and won the privilege of visiting the secret pavilion's branch headquarters a few days later, earning the envy of Gu Tong and the other freshmen. After the freshman competition ended, Gu Tong went out of his way to appear before Wu Lingling and enthusiastically declared, "Just you wait, Wu Lingling. You might have won this time, but don't think I'll just let you have instructor key training slot in world domination so easily." After saying so, Gu Tong turned around and left. However, despite his arrogant statement, none of the freshmen nearby thought that he was being overconfident. After all, everyone present was aware that Gu Tong's cousin was Gu Yiren, Shadow's current present and a genius nurtured internally by world domination. The resources he had access to far surpassed that of the average person. However, Wu Lingling couldn't help but be confused by this situation. Since when did she possess a training slot in world domination? Ignore that crazy bastard, class rep. Instructor, she told us to get online as soon as the competition ends. Qin Wuchen reminded Wu Lingling when he saw her deep in thought. We'll be exploring the Withered Ruins inner region next. We might miss the chance to get in if we're late. Upon hearing Qin Wuchen's words, Wu Lingling quickly snapped out of her daze and followed Qin Wuchen to the Academy's rest area. God's Domain Academy, Instructor's rest area. Just as Shi Feng was about to enter one of the private rooms and log into God's Domain, a familiar figure approached him. This person was none other than Luo Tiancheng, the right-hand man of Shadow's director Lan Hailong. At this moment, though, instead of the hostile and contemptuous expression he previously wore, Luo Tiancheng currently wore a wide smile on his face. "What are you looking at me like that for, Instructor Luo?" Shi Feng calmly asked as he looked at the hindrance blocking his way. "Do you have some good news to tell me?" "You guessed correctly. I did come here with good news," Luo Tiancheng said, nodding. "The Academy's senior instructor Qi has set his sights on Wu Lingling, so Director Lan plans to give you a chance. So long as you hand over the position of Wu Lingling's instructor, Director Lan will allow you back into Shadow. Although you won't be able to return to the guild leader position, it shouldn't be a problem for you to become a team leader for one of the guild's second-line teams. With that position, you won't have to worry about money for the rest of your life." "I see." Shi Feng had more or less expected something like this to happen, so he wasn't surprised by Luo Tiancheng's good news. Calmly, he said, "In that case, I'll have to trouble you to pass a word to Director Lan, Instructor Luo." "What is it?" Luo Tiancheng asked with a puzzled look. "Scram.